Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching What If Hinata Was Kurama's Jinchuriki. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
It's over. The darkness was illuminated by a candle that sputtered to life. Yes, thank God. Yandaime has saved us again. The middle-aged woman put a hand to her heart in relief and said, "Bless his soul, he lives?" "I should hope he does," the other person said with a determined nod. "His dear son, only 2 months old." "Yes, but what?" A cry shattered the silence, and the two women looked at one another while cautiously navigating the shadows. One went to the door and cautiously peered out. She gasped in surprise and threw it open. "Goodness, look," she exclaimed as she returned. She was holding a bundle. A baby. A newborn, from the looks of it. "The poor thing," she said, giving the infant a gentle cheek rub. "So many families have been lost in this battle." "Wait. Look." The other person shoved the blanket away, exposing the baby's stomach's swirling pattern. After a moment of silent staring, one of them quickly wrapped the blanket around the infant once more. "We'll speak to the Hokage about this," she added. She put the baby down, sighed, and stroked a few stray hairs before saying, "But now I think it's time the little one got some rest. Sleep well, child. You have a hard life ahead of you." The baby's eyes opened as she left, revealing serene, innocent lavender eyes that were unaware of the challenges life would present. A swing made a soft creak. A young girl sat there rocking slowly, her eyes lavender and her hair dark blue. "What are you doing? Get back inside." Hinata nodded after looking up in surprise. As she walked back in, she nervously poked her fingers together to avoid the caretaker's irate gaze. She plucked up the courage to apologize. She wished her voice wouldn't shake so much as she said, "Gee, Gomen, I was just get inside." Hinata flinched at the icy words and ran as fast as she could without running back inside, not wanting to be shouted at again. But by now, she was accustomed to it. "Naruto." The boy turned around sheepishly and winced. "2-san," he exclaimed with a naive smile. Nay, can you play now?" The Yandaime Hokage grinned and shook his head as he glanced down at his son. Without waiting for a response, he swung the boy up and allowed him to sit on his shoulders. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that what you were just doing?" he asked. "Come on then, Naruto. We haven't been to Ichiraku in a while." His father grinned indulgently as they strolled through Konoha's streets, Naruto laughing as he pointed out objects. "Hokage Sama!" exclaimed a middle-aged woman, who rushed to him and bowed. She straightened up and pointed to a small group of kids a short distance away. "The children were asking about you. If you had time." He responded with a friendly laugh. "Come, Naruto-kun, time to be of good service to the community." As they strolled around with the kids, the Hokage talked, joked, and gave advice. The kids were too enamored with their idol, the village hero, to do much. The blonde child pouted in response, but he followed his father. Naruto leaned down to his father's ear as they waved them away. "Nay, 2-san. Who are they?" He reached up to tap his son on the head and said, "They were the children from the orphanage." His eyes were sadder and darker. "Never forget what you have, Naruto. Never forget the power of being loved, of having people who would do anything for you, who you can call your own." When Naruto looked up to watch the children fleeing, he noticed a dark-haired girl in the back who was stumbling behind the group as though she didn't belong. He blinked, and a second later they had turned the corner and disappeared. "I have you, 2-san. I'll always have you." Yandaime grinned. "Hi, Naruto." "And you have me," the young boy exclaimed, beaming broadly. "I won't let you down." He laughed. "I never thought you would, Naruto." They never gave the power of acknowledgement or recognition any thought as they made their way back to the Hokage mansion. Or the strength of a shy little girl, lost in her fate and her curse. "It's too bright." Hinata squinted and rubbed her eyes drowsily. She glanced at her clock and wondered, a little, why it was so early. "Oh. Correct." She sighed and dragged herself out of bed in the last remnants of sleep, determined to do the best she could to get ready for the day. Hinata pushed the bathroom door open gently and looked at her reflection. The 12-year-old looked at her reflection uneasily, her eyes sweeping over her features. The same lavender eyes, the same dark blue hair, the same formless body covered by loose clothing. Hinata slowly pressed her hands together to create the recognizable seals. Byakugan. Her eyes turned dazzling white, focusing until they glared fiercely at her reflection, and the veins burst. Her arms dropped to her sides after a moment, and her Byakugan moved away. As she raised the hem of her shirt in response, she started to focus and gather her chakra. She sighed and dropped her stance as she watched a swirling design emerge. What a freak she was. For the past few months, ever since she had fully realized who she was, it had become her daily ritual. Hinata hurried along, keeping her gaze fixed on the ground and attempting to dodge the irate gazes of those around her. She detested taking walks in the city. I detested it. It's her. What is that thing doing? She doesn't belong. Bless his soul, but Yandaime is too gentle. That demon freak doesn't even deserve to be mentioned in the same sentence as him. Don't say that word. You know that. She's still a demon. Ineffectively trying to ignore their harsh words, the lavender-eyed girl hurried along faster, blinking quickly. However, she had noticed something. She's still a demon. A demon. Demon. Her hand wandered to her stomach, where, during training, she had once noticed an odd pattern. A swirl encircled by letters. Although she hadn't given it much thought at the time, the woman's blatant statement that she's still a demon seemed to mean so much more than a name coined by those who detested her, resented her for unknown reasons. Perhaps the name, demon, was inspired by the same factors. Now that she thought of that day, Hinata sighed. Everything had started to come together that day. She had hurried to the library that day and laboriously researched everything related to seals until she came across one that resembled her belly. She had read about the jinchuriki, containers, and tailed beasts that day. It was the kyubi she had read about. After weeks of research, she finally concluded that the design was more than just a decoration, even though it was really just a few highly suspicious coincidences and some very educated guesses. At that point, the librarian started anticipating her every day. The villagers also claimed that the moniker, Demon Freak, was rooted in more than just hatred. Since the demon was her, she was the Nine Tails container, Hyuga Hinata. Hinata scowled slightly and let out a loud exhale. She was a freak for other reasons, of course. Obviously not. With wide, terrified eyes, the academy student slowly retreated. What are you? What kind of a freak are you? At his words, Hinata's shoulders drooped. She would have likely been afraid to be the object of her gaze, so he had good reason to be afraid. She had been losing when they sparred, something Iruka-sensei was reluctant to allow. Badly, she said. She had experienced a surge of chakra as he raised his kunai for the final blow, and she could feel her eyes changing, her vision sharpening, and the world suddenly growing so much larger as she was overcome by a dizzying sensation. Nevertheless, she had managed to stay somewhat upright, her gaze still fixed on her adversary, who had dropped his weapon in surprise and fled backward, separating them as much as possible. Freak, he repeated. What's going on? Iruka-sensei inquired. Hinata experienced a wave of relief. He might be able to assist. She could feel her eyes getting back to normal as she turned to face him. Iruka-sensei, exclaimed the other boy. He clung frantically to the chunin, saying, give her detention. Tell the other teachers about her. Keep her out of the class. She's crazy. She's a freak. You shouldn't. Iruka-sensei was interrupted by a loud voice that said, my 2.san says that you shouldn't say things like that. Hinata turned her head shyly to face a yellow-haired boy who was posing like a superhero, with his hands on his hips. All eyes were on him, and he smiled broadly. Iruka-sensei sighed and reprimanded the boy, saying, Naruto-kun, you shouldn't use the Hokage Sama's words too carelessly. Oh. Naruto Uzumaki, son of Hokage Sama. After a while, the chunin broke up his argument with Iruka-sensei and the boy who had called her a freak, separating the two boys. The chunin knelt by Hinata, his eyes soft, after he demanded a thorough explanation from both sides. One yelled loudly, adding a lot of freak-s, while the other stammered and stuttered in a voice that was hardly more than a whisper. In the hopes that he wouldn't punish her as severely if she were obedient, she had nodded rapidly when he said, Hinata, I'm going to take you to talk to Hokage Sama about this, alright? Okay then. See me after class. Hinata sighed and closed her eyes. Although Yandaime Sama had not been able to tell her much, her Byakugan had been found approximately 2 years prior. He had subtly revealed to them what he knew about her eyes after she had thoroughly embarrassed herself by not even addressing him or looking at him, then squeaking out a Hokage Sama, and bowing heavily. Your eyes, when they do that, are called Byakugan. I honestly can't tell you much more than that. I know that they have 360 degree vision and can see through objects. But their greatest tool is that they can see the chakra system. He walked over to the frightened blue-haired young lady. He looked remarkably like his son and smiled boyishly at her, saying, "This is a great asset, and you'll likely find that it'll save your life in the future. It'll take hard work, though. Train hard. Hinata-san. I hope to see you with a Konoha Hite.8 someday." And she trained hard. She had researched the chakra systems during her many trips to the library, which was fast becoming a landmark in her past, testing them on herself and strangers she encountered on the street. She trained herself to understand the flow of the chakra and to use her knowledge of the chakra systems of people she saw on the street to identify whether they were shinobi or simply villagers. She had trained her Baikugan's 360-degree vision and distance range over countless nights. However, reading about Tenketsus was her biggest triumph. That thought caused Hinata to grimace. The procedure, which essentially involved her closing off her own chakra points while standing in front of a mirror, had been rather agonizing. She went on to more late-night trainings after she had essentially ascertained their impact, during which she essentially mauled the practice dummies. After months of development, nearly a year, she had finally developed her own style of taijutsu. Although it was still basic and her stance was weak, she could effectively shut down an opponent by striking their chakra points when she focused. When she looked at the clock, her thoughts were startled out of their reverie. Hinata was startled and hurried to get ready, berating herself for falling asleep so easily on such a significant day. She would formally become a ninja today after graduating from the academy. Naruto-kun. Get up! The middle-aged woman cried in a panic as she hurried into Naruto's room. The 12-year-old raised his head drowsily and scowled. He said, "5 more minutes, Oba-cha," before snoring. She shook him and said, "Naruto-kun, again. You have to get up. You're already late. The test is today, in 5 minutes." He jolted out of bed and ran through his room in search of clothing. She said, somewhat amused, "Hurry, Naruto-kun," as she walked out of his room. Naruto hurried through the streets. Damn, why did I have to stay up late to train?" he asked himself. He was still on the other side of Konoha, and by now the tests had likely begun. Naruto-kun. Good luck today, exclaimed a fruit-stand vendor with a warm smile on her face as she raised her hand in greeting. Thanks, Nei-chan, he said with a smile and a wave while sprinting. As he moved a piece on the shogi board, an elderly man grinned and said, Naruto-kun. Hurry. Many of the students have already been there for half an hour. The yellow-haired boy, still cursing himself, sped up upon hearing this. He sighed as he hurried through the quiet yard and finally saw the academy. He yanked the door open and hurried through the eerily quiet hallways, determined to reach his classroom. Hyuga Hinata. A blue-haired girl got up and followed Iruka-sensei into another room as Naruto dashed into the classroom, tumbling in a ragged heap. So, you made it. Naruto nodded and laughed. Nay, Shikamaru, you haven't gone yet? He started to shake his head, but they were cut off by a loud shout. Naruto. A genin with pink hair stomped over to him in rage. Where were you? It's just like you to be irresponsible and late for the most important day in your shinobi career. He scowled and pulled back a little. Sakura-chan. A glint in her forehead caught his attention. You passed? She tapped the forehead protector with a sly smile. I'm an official ninja now, she said, surreptitiously glancing at a certain boy with raven hair. And maybe now Sasuke-kun will notice me. Sasuke gave him a cool look and a half-nod in response to Naruto's HMPHING shout. Naruto sighed and moved to sit down as Iruka-sensei and a recently hired genin left the room. Inuzuka Kiba. Iruka gave Naruto a sour look as Kiba got up to take the test. Naruto-kun, you're late. With an enthusiastic smile and a victory sign, the blonde boy asked, but you haven't gotten to me yet, have you? Iruka waved Kiba into the classroom and closed the door after shaking his head. I'm a real ninja now, right? Good job, it's something I would expect from my son. Congratulations on graduating. Mom is going to fix you something nice tonight. Hinata heard the sounds of a carefree celebration, but she painfully closed her eyes. There was no one with whom to celebrate her graduation. Nobody was willing to congratulate her. Loneliness was more painful than before. Hokage. Sama, Yandaime. Sama, Tou-san. Naruto proudly displayed his new headband as he ran towards his father. I did it, Tou-san. Now I can protect Konoha like you do. Leaning down, he ruffled his son's hair with a warm smile. Congratulations, Naruto. I always knew you could do it. Iruka approached and stood beside him, saying, Hokage. Sama, the robed figure gave him a subtle glance. She passed. Yes. Her bunshin was flawless. Iruka grinned broadly as he turned to face Naruto. Yondaime laughed and nodded silently, his eyes still fixed on his son. He takes after you, doesn't he, Hokage? Sama? He asked. Then, I also have some news for you. Because of the class rankings, the Chunin leaned forward and whispered the final sentence, eager to share this intriguing piece of news with the Hokage. The man with the blonde hair looked at him, his eyes lighting up in surprise. Are you sure? Iruka nodded, grinned, and bowed as she retreated into the darkness. As his son babbled on about how he would become the world's greatest ninja, he turned back to look at the newest genins and grinned enigmatically. Well, this will be an interesting setup. Starting today, you are all official ninjas, but you are all still new genins. It's going to get harder from here. You all will be in a group of 3, where you will accomplish missions under a Junin teacher. Iruka went on while holding up a stack of papers as the new ninjas arrived, many of them looking at friends, with Sasuke receiving a lot of eagerly hopeful looks. The Chunin grinned as he looked over his students, who had gathered one final time, and said, We've arranged the groups such that overall abilities are equivalent. I will now announce them. The phrase, Sasuke.kun, 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 Sasuke Sasuke's. Everyone except Sasuke, everyone except Sasuke, Teme. I'm hoping to be on a monodine with Sasuke. Team 8. Haruno Sakura, Inazuka Kiba, Aburame Shino. You see? Ino asked, delighted at the situation of her old friend. I'm definitely going to be with Sasuke. Team 10. Yamanaka Ino, Nara Shikamaru, Akamichi Choji. With a moan, Ino lowered her head against the desk and turned to give the boy next to her a menacing glare. Sakura smirked and remarked, Looks like you won't be with Sasuke.kun either. Of course, it's okay for me. True love will always prevail. Iruka scowled and shuffled the papers, saying, Oh, seems I skipped one. Team 7. Uzumaki Naruto, Uchiha Sasuke, Hyuga Hinata. Sakura looked at Ino and frowned. Hyuga? Hinata? Who? Ignoring the jealous looks she was getting from all the other kunoichi in the class, Ino pointed to an indigo-haired girl sitting in the corner and said, She's that girl, the quiet one with the weird eyes. Sakura let out a frustrated sigh and pouted. Lucky, I'd like to be on Sasuke-kun's team. Ino twitched and poked a finger at 2 more individuals. Instead you get Bug Boy and Dog Boy. Well, you're stuck with a lazy boy and a large one. Iruka. Sensei declared, That's it for the groups. I'm going to introduce the Junin teachers in the afternoon. Meeting adjourned until then. Hinata sat silently, her gaze shifting to her 2 teammates while the other genin stood, loudly chatting and grumbling. One sat, unconcerned with Naruto's remarks and the throngs of fangirls, while the other wore a bright orange jumpsuit and had wild yellow hair. They couldn't be more different. The only surviving member of the renowned Uchiha clan, the #1 rookie of the year, a loud-mouthed prankster, and the son of Yondaime Hokage are the people I'm paired with. They're with me. The blind loser and the demon freak. Hinata sighed and got up, not quite ready to go up to her teammates just yet. Rather, she quietly left the classroom and returned to her apartment for another solitary meal. Yo, are you planning on being late to the meeting? Me? Late? Do you know who your team is? Maybe? Don't fail them this year. I don't think you'll be able to fail them. We'll see. You have the #1 rookie. Which means that the dead last is on my team. So is the Hokage's son. I'll be sure to have fun while testing them. And if they pass, it'll make for an unparalleled team. He's late. You said that already. Naruto moaned and slammed his head against the wall, asking, But why is our teacher the only one who is late? Anyo, I'm sure Sensei has a reason. When the blonde boy turned around, he saw a girl with dark hair leaning against the far wall. He asked, You're Hinata, right? She looked down and poked her fingers together as she nodded in response. She looked up again and was shocked to see Naruto squeezing a chalkboard eraser between the wall and the door. Hi. Hyuga Hinata. Are you sir? A Junin isn't going to fall for a plain old booby trap like that. A hand materialized in the doorway as Sasuke was saying this, yanking the door open. Additionally, the plain old booby trap is set off. He was duped. It's unbelievable that he fell for it. I'm praying he doesn't shout at us. I'm praying he doesn't despise us. Really? Is he a Junin? Indeed? Leaning down, the silver-haired ninja picked up the fallen eraser and examined it before raising his head in contemplation. How should I say this? My first impressions of you guys are. He allowed his gaze to wander over each of the genins, including the stoic Uchiha, the boy with the yellow hair who almost resembled the Hokage, and the girl, who had indigo hair and white eyes, reflected the bitterness of her life and the waning innocence of her soul in her eyes. He let out a sigh. Follow me. Let's see, why don't you introduce yourselves? Introduce ourselves. What should we say? What you like, hate, your dreams and hobbies. Something like that. Naruto smiled. Anyo, why don't you introduce yourself first, sensei? The Junin pointed to himself and shrugged. Hinata's forehead furrowed as he said, I'm Hitaki Kakashi. I have no intention of telling you my likes and dislikes. As for my dream, he continued, looking up at the sky, before concluding, I have few hobbies. Naruto's expression dimmed. He told his teammates, so all we found out was his name, and was pleased when Hinata reluctantly nodded while grinning slightly. Kakashi pointed to Naruto and said, now it's your turn, you first. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, he declared while adjusting his forehead shield. He wrinkled his nose and said, I like ramen, Konoha, and my 2.san. I hate, Naruto nodded matter of factly as Hinata stared at him with a faint smile on her face. I hate the 3 minutes that I have to wait after I put in the hot water to make cup ramen, and cowards. I hate cowards and people who are too weak to fight back or help others. My dream is to become a strong ninja and protect Konoha like my 2.san does. Kakashi thought, this boy is just like you, sensei. And my hobbies are eating and comparing ramen, oh, and training. Kakashi gave nod. He looked over at Hinata, your turn. She looked down and said, Anyo, my name is Hyuga Hinata. It sounds so pitiful to say, I like reading and, nice people. Faintly blushing, she stated, I dislike, mean people. And, my dream is to, become worthy. Deserving of recognition, felicitation, and recognition as an individual. My hobbies are, Anyo, reading and training. Junin, who had silver hair, turned to face Sasuke, last guy. With his elbows resting on his knees and his hands folded in front of his face, he said, my name is Uchiha Sasuke. There are many things that I hate and few things that I like. Also, I have an ambition that I have no intention to leave as just a dream. The revival of my clan, and to kill a certain man. Naruto gave him a cautious look. I hope he's not talking about me. He recalled Sasuke from their early years together. He had met many of the Konoha clans, including the Uchiha clan, as the Hokage's son. Although they had been close friends, Sasuke had only thought of him as a classmate following the clan massacre. Hinata cautiously glanced at her third teammate. This certain man made her feel, to put it mildly, sorry. She had received a few death threats herself, but none as heinous as this one. With a sigh, Kakashi's visible eye narrowed in contemplation. He nearly wanted them to fail so he could observe how they developed, which is exactly what I thought would happen with Team 7. Alright. He took another close look at them. He could see that each of them had a distinct personality, but only the Uchiha's remarks had been especially noteworthy. As expected, Naruto straightened his eyes and said, we're going to begin a mission starting tomorrow. The genin caught the undertone in his voice as he leaned forward and said, first we're going to do something that we four can do. Survival training. Naruto remarked, we had plenty of training back at the academy. Why are we training if it's a mission? Kakashi grinned to himself and then laughed, saying, this is no ordinary training. Anyo, sensei, he leaned forward, smiling, and said, well, if I say this, I'm sure you 3 are going to be surprised. Out of the 27 graduates, only 9 are going to become genins. The other 18 will be sent back to the academy. In other words, this training is going to be a very hard test with a dropout rate of 66%. His words caused Hinata to flinch. Oh, just 9. She slumped down miserably. Given how weak and despised she was, she knew she had no chance. No matter what, they would most likely manage to prevent her from turning into a genin. Naruto rocked back and forth, screaming in shock, Nani? No way, I went through so much trouble, then what was the final exam for? With a shrug, Kakashi said, that? It just picks out those who are qualified to become genin. Anyway, I'm going to determine whether you pass or fail tomorrow at the training grounds. Bring your ninja equipment and meet at 5 a.m. Kakashi said as they yelled in protest. Well, only the yellow-haired, loud one was speaking. Nothing like this will cause me to drop out. I need to demonstrate my skills and demonstrate that I am truly as strong as my 2-san. No, I have to do this, but I can't. I must if I wish to become a genin, but I can't. They'll just bring me down as a team, but if it's individual testing, I must go by this place. I must become stronger than he is. As though he hadn't just told them that their chances of becoming genin were less than 50%, Kakashi turned away from them and said, now then, meeting over. Oh yeah, don't eat breakfast. You're going to throw up if you do. Hinata took a deep breath, his words only making her doubts worse. Yane. Hinata sighed and walked slowly over to the training field. She could see Naruto and Sasuke approaching from a different angle. Oh. Ohio. The trio gathered in the middle and stood motionless and quiet. An hour went by. Naruto was sitting on the ground, leaning against his pack, nearly faint. Hinata was exhausted, hungry, and drooping. Sasuke rubbed his eyes surreptitiously as he stood there, looking unconcerned. 2 hours. 3 hours. Hinata shielded her eyes from the sun and gazed up at the sky blearily. The sun seemed especially hot and big today, and they had been waiting for what felt like an eternity. Why did she have such sensitive eyes and pale skin? Even better, why did she typically act like such a pig? She probably wouldn't be as hungry if she were on a diet. A shadow fell on the 3 genins as Hinata bent to search through her pack, after a protracted silence. You're late. Kakashi rubbed the back of his head and laughed sheepishly. You see, a black cat crossed my path and... You're lying. Naruto-san. Kakashi reached into his pouch and said, Anyway. I was planning on giving you the bell test, but... Bell test? With a shake of his head, the Junin produced 6 scrolls, 3 in each hand. Instead, each of you will receive a scroll. One says taijutsu, one says genjutsu and one says ninjutsu. He distributed them and held up the remaining 3, have 3 other scrolls that say the same thing. Your task is to try and get the matching scroll from me. Naruto folded his arms and snorted, is that it? That's easy. There are 3 requirements. 1. Kakashi raised his finger. You must each retrieve your matching scroll to pass. 2. He extended a second finger. I will be trying to take your scrolls as well. If any of your scrolls are taken, you all fail. And 3. You have 2 hours to complete this test. If you do not have both scrolls by then, you fail. HMPH. Of course, I have no trouble getting a scroll. I suppose Sasuke is good, but what about Hinata? She doesn't appear to be very. Obtain a scroll. From a Junin, and simultaneously safeguard my own. I don't want Sasuke-san or Naruto-san to fail, but I can't. We all fail if any of our scrolls are taken. Oh no, both of them will need to be covered by me. I was aware that a 3-person team would simply defeat me. We're going to start after I say, ready, start. They squatted into combat positions. Okay. By defending Hinata and obtaining a scroll before Sasuke, I'll demonstrate my strength. I must do this. I'll have to use Byakugan against a real opponent, even though I haven't done so before. I could distract Kakashi Sensei from the other 2 by luring him in. However, he is a Junin, so perhaps. Ready, start. They quickly fled into the trees in opposing directions. With a smile, Kakashi took his book out of his pouch. They're already off to a rough start, so why not give them some time to unwind? Hold on, what did Junko do? Oh, Jiraiya. Sama, ho. Byakugan. Hinata knelt on the branch and spoke as softly as she could. The vastness of the world she saw gave her a brief thrill, but she shook it off and kept her eyes on her teammates. They appear secure. Kakashi Sensei isn't present here. He's reading a book, right? Hinata blinked in bewilderment, scowled, and focused on her sensei's recognizable figure. Hinata nervously reached around her to touch the scroll, wondering if she could maintain eye contact with him. When she clasped another hand, she whirled around, yelling and confronting Kakashi Sensei. Abruptly, she noticed 2 figures behind Sasuke and Naruto. Naruto-san. Sasuke-san. Hinata fixed her gaze on the Junin in front of her as her Byakugan noticed them turning around to confront Kakashi. But Kakashi was here, in front of her. And who was in the clearing, reading a book? He grinned at her and said, Hinata. Chan. Those eyes of yours are impressive. She held up her hands defensively, nervously. So you're planning on fighting? Very brave of you, Hinata-chan. She opened her eyes wide, shuddered a little, then sealed and vanished in a puff of smoke. The Kakashi Bunshin vanished in a cloud of smoke after saying, Kawarimi no jutsu, huh? That's one way to escape. I can't, Kami-sama. How will I ever obtain a scroll? That was very close. She swiftly altered her course and landed next to Naruto and Sasuke after spotting them. Sasuke stated, that was the Cage Bunshin technique. Be careful. Those clones could take your scroll. Now what? We Circa can't fight him. Sasuke let out a sigh, but Naruto abruptly cut him off as he was about to speak. Nay. How about I go in and... Quiet, do you want him to know where we are? Naruto scowled menacingly. How about I go in and get the scrolls and give them to you? Hinata paused. Anyo, en Naruto-san. That's stupid. Sasuke-san. Sasuke sighed as though it were painful to say, I'll engage him, and distract him, since I have the best chance of not actually losing my scroll. Naruto, you should go in and retrieve the scrolls. Hina Hinata, right? You can cover for us. She looked down and noticed that her cheeks were flushed. She was aware that he had paused and assigned her the simplest task. She would most likely ruin it anyhow. When I make a move, we'll start. Sasuke watched Kakashi in the middle as they dispersed. He was doing nothing at all. The Uchiha drew some shuriken out and prepared them out of ire. A page was turned by the Junin. Await it. Kakashi let out a yawn. Soon. The man with the silver hair moved, nearly. He pivoted. There, Sasuke quickly dropped his weapons and sprang to the side. Kakashi jumped straight into a trap after dodging the shuriken volley, as was expected. Sasuke came up behind him and struck his back with his fist. The Uchiha grinned and said, Sasuke-kun, never thought you'd attack first, so hastily. Sasuke grunted and punched him again. Pulling himself around, Kakashi stopped Sasuke's kick. Shinobi tactic no. How number 1? Kakashi pulled himself back and released Sasuke in a blur of motion. He casually took a scroll out of his pouch and said, Taijutsu. Which happens to be your scroll? Sasuke stiffened. Where are you, Naruto? Kakashi. Sensei. Sasuke snarled. You're supposed to get the scrolls, Naruto. Kakashi looked at the son of the Hokage. Well, what are you doing, en Naruto-san? Standing directly in front of me, like the baka you are, shouting. Let's have a match, fair and square. Hinata sighed, hidden in the trees. He seems like a good guy, but... Naruto slowed as the Junin reached into his pouch and continued to charge at Kakashi while grinning. Sasuke, since this is your scroll, you may want to pay close attention. He started to slowly take something out of his pouch, and all three tensed. The same thing is true. The orange book, it was written by Ero. Senin. Are those read by Kakashi, sensei? Anyo. Why did you take out a book? Kakashi shrugged and asked, why? I got curious as to how the story is going to develop. He continued innocently, don't worry. It's the same whether I read this or not. Even if you are the son of my sensei. Naruto rushed at him in rage. His fist drew back. Kakashi deflected the kick after catching the punch. The blonde shinobi was about to punch him again when he found himself staring into space while Sasuke raised an eyebrow in his direction. Naruto slowly turned his head, his eyes lighting up his hand position as he said, a ninja should not let the enemy get behind him multiple times. That's the tiger's seal. Kaiden Jutsus is the recipient of that seal. Sasuke's gaze grew strained. Hidden village of Konoha's secret taijutsu master art, the genin's face melted into a sickly, apprehensive expression as he felt a sharp, stabbing pain. 1,000 years of pain. Hinata leaned forward, a puzzled frown on her face as she blinked. Two fools. Kakashi watched Naruto crash into some trees in the distance as Sasuke unleashed a barrage of shuriken and kunai. He skillfully sidestepped them as Sasuke charged at him once more. Byakugan. Hinata slipped closer, keeping a close eye on the fight while keeping an eye out for Kakashi clones. She needed to be prepared to assist Sasuke if he faltered. She couldn't fail now or here. Kaiden. Gokakyu no Jutsu. Kakashi's gaze grew strained. That jutsu shouldn't be possible for a genin with his chakra. As he sealed, the enormous fireball engulfed him, blazing. Did Sasuke just defeat Kakashi? Sensei? Hinata gasped. The Uchiha began as the smoke cleared. Where is he? Hinata focused her Byakugan and her eyes narrowed. She glanced quickly at the trees. Nothing, but where? Below ground. The Hyuga jumped out of the trees, gasping, and made their way towards Sasuke. Sasuke-san. He's below you. Kakashi's hand emerged from the floor and took hold of Sasuke's ankle. He stared down in disbelief as a jutsu pulled him to the ground. Shinobi tactic no. How number 2, Kakashi grinned as he knelt before a laden Sasuke. Ninjutsu. He raised his head and saw Hinata. Nay, Hinata-chan? Since that's your scroll? Her hands trembled a little as she licked her dry lips without realizing it. Hinata, said Sasuke in a stern tone. Run. He'll take your scroll. Because you show weakness. She could hear the unspoken reason behind his statement all too clearly. Naruto hadn't been told to run by him. He had confronted Kakashi-sensei directly. Her teammates' lack of faith exacerbated her own doubts and anxieties, which in turn weakened her waning confidence. Sasuke-kun, have you no faith? Kakashi scowled. Said sourly, I refuse to fail here, Sasuke. Well, Hinata-chan, what can you do here? Here, what are you able to do, demon freak? What are you? I'm going to take you to see the Hokage. Team 7, Hyuga Hinata. My dream is to become worthy. He'll take your scroll. What can you do here? Here, what are you able to do? What are you able to do? What am I able to do? Well, Hinata-chan, Naruto moaned and jumped through the trees. What a secret taijutsu master art. Kakashi-sensei. He stopped, looked through the leaves, and saw Hinata facing Kakashi-sensei, shakily, looking down at the ground, sideways, and up at the sky, avoiding the eyes of Sasuke and Kakashi. Sasuke. In the earth. I see. Can do this. Naruto scowled as he leaned forward to observe Hinata transition into a fighting stance. Well, what is that? Which fashion is that? Sasuke eyed his third teammate, something I had never seen before. She appeared weak. He recalled Naruto from his early years and had the honor of being the son of the Yondaime Hokage. In contrast, Hinata. Oh? Kakashi asked, nodding while assessing her, confident. Hinata's stance weakened slightly as she breathed nervously. Hinata. Naruto cried out in a panic, leaping from the trees. Run, he'll take your scroll. She closed her eyes painfully, although Kakashi-sensei was closely monitored by her Byakugan. Their remarks were, to put it mildly, depressing. Their Junin-sensei said icily, funny. Sasuke-kun here said the exact same thing. Just then, a buzzer went off. Kakashi stood up, suddenly friendly, and said, it appears that time is up. You all fail. Hinata gasped and looked down, attempting to hide her tears. She approached Sasuke calmly and assisted him in escaping the jutsu. Anyo, Sasuke-san, Jigomen. With a growl, Sasuke pushed Hinata away and charged at Kakashi, intent on snatching his scroll. Kakashi grabbed him with flashing eyes, pushed him to the ground, sat on top of him, and pinched his arm behind his back. The Junin gazed up at the other two with dark eyes. At their shocked expressions, he asked, are you guys disrespecting what it means to be a shinobi? Why do you think we're training as teams? He asked, what do you think the purpose of this test was? When no one responded. Anyo, to become genins? Naruto. Kakashi laughed mockingly and shook his head. Baka. Nani? A furious Naruto frowned. Kakashi-sensei. Are all your heads empty? Don't you understand the meaning of the three-man teams? What about the three-person teams? Exclaimed the blonde genin, his fists clenched in frustration. Kakashi spoke with three icy, sharp words as his eyes narrowed. It's about teamwork. The three slumped guiltily as a flash of awareness passed through them. San occasionally tells me that teamwork is more important than individual performance. Teamwork is incredible. I have never before truly been a member of a team. Simply put, teamwork. Perhaps if I work with them, I'll be stronger than if I work alone. Kakashi stood up and let Sasuke go, shaking his head. It's about helping each other. If you had come at me together, you might have gotten the scrolls. This test was designed to see how you would work together, under extreme circumstances. However, Sasuke, you overestimated yourself and refused to see the abilities of others. Naruto, you ignored all plans and cockily challenged me yourself, thinking yourself better than the others. Hinata, he turned to her. You refused to act, and let your teammates do the work. Perhaps it was foolish to disregard the plans, but I only wanted to keep the others safe. I attempted to act and take action, but the plan was for me to do nothing. Oh no, I am aware that I am not like them. We did have a plan, too. Teams are used to complete missions. While a ninja does value advanced individual skills, teamwork is more important. He raised an eyebrow and tilted his head, saying, "Hopefully you don't need an example of that." He went on to say, "Sometimes you are forced to make impossible decisions before you die. Selfish actions that destroy teamwork bring danger to your teammates, and that can get them killed. All of the missions are dangerous jobs." With his hands in his pockets and his shoulders hunched, Kakashi approached a big black stone. He stood respectfully away from it and spoke in a flat, calm voice. "All the names carved into this stone, these are all ninjas of the village that are called heroes. When Naruto's father took him to see that stone in the past to pay his respects as the Hokage, he pointed out all the names and barely mentioned how much empty the stone had appeared when Naruto was born." Naruto's face fell. These aren't normal heroes. Hinata waited with a sick feeling in her stomach, wondering how many of those names had been carved there after her birth, wondering what kind of heroes they were, and wondering what they had given up to have their name engraved on that stone. They're heroes that were lost while serving. Sasuke's eyes squinted. Lost was a nice word. His family's deaths were referred to as murder, massacre, and, given how many people had been killed so rapidly, genocide. If anyone was lost, it was him. He had been lost along with the rest of his family. Lost. They died so the mission would succeed. The three genin fell silent as they realized the true meaning of being a shinobi, and they felt a pull at their hearts from a harsh sense of reality. This is a monument. Additionally, my best friend's name is engraved here. I want to be strong and protect everyone, especially Konoha, because so many damn people have been lost. So many. Why? Why do people kill other people? What is the purpose of murder? What benefits does dying offer? Why are monsters created? There are so many, and there will always be more, damn it. I promise that if my name is ever carved there, it will be next to his. I'll give you one final chance. What, another opportunity? Yada, we'll definitely do it this time. I promise, I'll try my hardest this time. Does Sensei really think we can succeed? Another chance. If we're going to pass, I'll need to assign them a role. This time, Kakashi took the 3 scrolls from his pouch, separated them, holding 2 in one hand and 1 in the other, and one of them vanished in a puff of smoke. Nani? That was my scroll. Naruto leaned forward in a panic. As you can see, there will only be 2 scrolls this time, so it was. Kakashi placed the remaining scrolls in his pouch. This time, you can pass as long as you have 2 scrolls, regardless of what they say. Anyo, sensei, he shrugged abruptly and said, you have 45 minutes, but since there are only 2 scrolls, his eyes flashed. Only 2 can pass. All set. Get going. Together, they ran into the trees, and Kakashi pulled out his book from his pouch while maintaining a composed expression. They're off to a predictable start, but if they didn't do that, I'd have to completely fail them as ninjas. 45 minutes later, we'll see if they can pass the real test. This time, don't be such a baka. Nani? Teme? N. Naruto.san. Sasuke.san. Our time is limited to 45 minutes. We must devise a strategy. Nay. How about we just utilize our previous one? Baka, that won't. When they both turned to face her, Hinata said, Anyo, using the old plan, might work. Encouraged by their implicit interest, she said, Naruto.san seems to be a good distraction. But we have to take more precautions. He can challenge Kakashi Sensei by entering first. Sasuke.san can then attempt to get the scrolls back. No, Sasuke said, we'll pretend that I'm the one aiming for the scrolls, but instead, I'll battle Kakashi Sensei along with Naruto. Hinata bit her lip and looked down. Then, who will obtain the scrolls? Hinata. The white-eyed girl drew back, taking a sharp breath. But I don't think. You must. You'll need to get the scrolls while feigning to be our backup, but Naruto and I can keep Kakashi busy. But, what if I, Hinata-chan, you can succeed? Naruto gave her a thumbs up while grinning, saying, teamwork is ultimately what matters most. She inhaled deeply, nodded, and grinned feebly, saying, hi. Kakashi laughed to himself and turned another page in his book. It's been a while, at least 15 minutes had gone by since they started the second test. Do 3 genin really think they can beat me in 30 minutes? Hey! Sensei Kakashi! Out of the trees, a horde of Narutos jumped. Come and get us. Baka. Those are just illusions, just bunchins. Kakashi, bored, ducked under their blows, allowing them to finally perish on their own. Oh, is that all? Grab this. Naruto hurled a shuriken at him, but the Junin dodged it and arched an eyebrow when he saw another one in its shadow. Naruto then swore as he stepped back. Okay, Sasuke. Let's see what you can accomplish. A group of kunai and shuriken were whistling towards his back, so he turned slightly and revealed himself. Kakashi deftly blocked them and turned to face Sasuke, where Naruto jumped on his back to hold him in place while the Uchiha lunged forward and targeted his pouch. I see that their teamwork has improved. However, it's still insufficient. After yanking around until Sasuke was grappling with his own teammate, Kakashi uttered those words aloud. Naruto grunted and jumped off their sensei's back, and Kakashi now faced them. The two jumped at him with battle cries. Well, only the yellow-haired loud one was screaming, and from the corner of his eye, the Junin saw Hinata crouching at the edge of the trees, her eyes focused on the fight. Too busy avoiding Naruto's crazy antics and Sasuke's fire jutsus, he took his eyes off her, and she smiled, making herself look like one of the Naruto bunchins. In an instant, she joined the battle, knowing that Kakashi Sensei would not give her much, if any, attention, believing she was just a trick. And maybe I'll be able to get a scroll with that. As the battle went on, Hinata tried to use her Byakugan to seal off Kakashi's Tenketsus, but it was mindless fighting. With all 3 genins combined, they managed to stay even with Kakashi, who was, admittedly, holding back most of his power. Kakashi Sensei hasn't given us a chance to recover the scrolls despite everything, but at least it's easier to fight him when his hands are partially disabled. Time is running out. Sasuke swiftly executed another Kaden Jutsu. He was starting to run out of chakra from using it so much to restart the fight and give the others time to recover. This is terrible. Hinata still hasn't received the scrolls, and there isn't much time left. I can't fail here. I'll have to try for the scrolls myself. Naruto caught Kakashi in the aftermath of the fireball and launched another attack on him while grinning maniacally. It will be simple to obtain a scroll now. I'm not sure what Hinata did, but Sensei's attacks are now less potent. Hinata, who was still dressed as the yellow-haired genin, impulsively released the henge and charged quickly at Kakashi. Sensei, taking everyone by surprise. She was breathing heavily and aimed a kunai at him while he was distracted by Naruto. I'm capable. Goodbye. She used her many hours of training to attack the Junin in a rush of movement. She wasn't very good, and her attacks weren't very accurate, but it was the best she had. And then her reflexes kicked in, and she used the element of surprise to push him back. Impressive, Kakashi thought, shifting into defensive positions. He could have easily stopped her in a real battle, but in this instance, it was interesting to see what she could do. However, it wasn't as though she was going to receive a scroll. When the buzzer sounded, the silver-haired Junin quickly seized Hinata and wrapped her arm around her back to secure her. Well, looks like you all, he grinned. Yada. Kakashi stared at Sasuke in disbelief, stunned. There, in his hands. A shy but proud smile spread across Hinata's face as she gasped and looked at her 2 teammates. Naruto laughed and mockingly gestured to their sensei, saying, we did it, we succeed, we made it. Kakashi laughed to himself and let go of Hinata, who staggered to her teammate's side. So you actually retrieved a scroll. Sasuke raised an eyebrow and flipped the scroll over several times. Ninjutsu. This is Hinata's matching scroll. I must admit that I wouldn't have gotten the scroll if it weren't for her final attack. Kakashi. Sensei, nay. I take it we got a scroll? I take it we pass? Naruto put his hands on his hips and laughed loudly. Wrong. Kakashi grinned and laughed as well. Well? You only retrieved 1 scroll, therefore only 1 person can pass. Naruto's face fell in shock, and he scowled at his father's former pupil while pouting. Sasuke gave a slight snort. He was aware of this, and he intended to fight for this scroll and this opportunity. She wanted to pass so badly, but did she deserve it? Hinata looked down, her eyes far away. So, you'll have to figure out amongst yourselves who gets that scroll. Kakashi's eyes lit up. After all, you can only pass if you have 2 scrolls. 2 scrolls. Hinata took a sharp breath and looked up abruptly. 2 scrolls, but... What have they done for you? Whispered the depressing, despairing part of her brain. Don't. However, fight for it. Fight for it. Your attack diverted his attention, and you gave Sasuke the opportunity to obtain the scroll. However, outside her mind, she could hear Sasuke fumbling with the scroll, clearly itching to just take the scrolls and tell Kakashi Sensei to pass him, and only him, while Naruto argued loudly with him, threatening to kick his butt if he didn't let them pass. However, don't you have to be a ninja and defend yourself if you want to be worthy? Nay, demon freak. However, I must think of myself first if I want to be worthy. How can I feel proud of myself if Anyo, hi, Hinata-chan, will you make a case for your claim to the scroll? The Hyuga took a deep breath and glanced at Kakashi Sensei before turning to face her two teammates. The yellow-haired one was showing her open curiosity, while the raven-haired one was showing her implicit interest. Kakashi Sensei, Anyo, you mentioned that we must pass with 2 scrolls, correct? Hi. And there's only 1 extra scroll. Biting her lip, the white-eyed girl summoned the bravery to reach into her pouch and retrieve her scroll, which she clutched tightly before throwing it to Naruto, who caught it off guard. What are you doing, Hinata? Kakashi Sensei, you only said that we need 2 scrolls to pass. They each have 2 now and, she said, trying to smile. Raising an eyebrow, Kakashi said, you're giving up yourself for them? Well, there's 4 scrolls combined, S.So. Ah, well then, he said, shrugging. Hold on. Oh, do you intend to give Hinata-chan, Naruto, your scrolls? In response, the genin frowned and said, no, but why can't Hinata-chan pass as well? Dobi. She handed you her scroll. Demo, Sasuke. Teme over here got the scroll because of Hinata. What's the point of her failing? If anyone, why not Sasuke? Teme, he took no action. Baka. I got the scroll. You see, I would have definitely received both scrolls if you hadn't shoved me aside. Naruto nodded and laughed loudly, almost too loudly. Hinata blinked as she looked at them, wondering why he was trying to help her, why he was defending her, and why he hadn't just taken the scroll and passed. Kakashi eyed her and said, Anyo, Naruto-san. Why you should just pass. It was undoubtedly a selfless gesture, but why was she doing this? Naruto gave her a scowl. Sasuke smirked in response to the sound he made before hurling one of his scrolls at Hinata, who fumbled with it uncertainly, her lips pressed together in shock. Who would want to play for a team that only has the dobi? Yes, indeed. Who wants? Naruto interrupted abruptly, turning to face Sasuke with a furious expression, Teme, who made the statement. All right, Kakashi. Sensei, who will you pass? Each of the 3 caught the Junin's attention as he glanced at them. We have to do it together or not at all. Sensei, you said it? Naruto exclaimed abruptly, tossing his extra scroll to the ground. You do realize we're a 3-man team? Yes, we are all 3 of us? Hinata said, hi, as she gripped her lone scroll. You know, 3 is 1. As dark clouds started to roll in and lightning split the sky, Kakashi moved slowly forward with his hands sealed. Shinobi tactic no. How number 3, Genjutsu, which is the scroll Naruto has, he said. Taijutsu, he said, pointing to Sasuke. Ninjutsu, he said, moving his finger to Hinata. Genjutsu. Kakashi spread his arms. All of these are essential parts of being a ninja. You said it was 3 as 1? As thunder roared overhead, the Junin laughed. But even though I told you you needed 6 scrolls, you only have 3 total. He leaned down, his eyes narrowed and focused on them as a result. You succeed. Eventually, the ominous clouds dissipated, exposing the same azure sky they had previously witnessed. But now that the sun seems so much brighter, Hinata grinned and tipped her head back to the sky, realizing the true test that Kakashi had put them through. She was thankful to her teammates, Kakashi, Sensei, and herself. You 2 come first. Up until now, the others were fools who followed my instructions. Kakashi straightened up and remarked, a ninja has to read underneath the underneath. Even though you should stand up for what you believe in, you don't always do so. Those who break the rules are referred to as trash in the ninja world, but you know what? People who neglect their friends are worse than trash. With an excited smile, Naruto threw his scroll into the air. We succeeded. They might actually be interesting, Sasuke thought, shaking his head with a half-smile on his face. It all came back to Hinata, the reason they had passed. This was the first time Hinata had ever been on a team, the first time she had ever assisted others, and the first time someone had assisted her. She laughed. Kakashi raised an eyebrow as he looked around at his team, Team 7, which included a legendary Biju, 2 strong bloodlines, and the most erratic, hyperactive child he had ever seen. This should be enjoyable. Hinata isn't entirely sure why. When she awakens the following morning, why does she feel that way? Not the same. Never mind that, though, because she doesn't want to be late for her, and, in private, she believes their training session is a genin, though she's not entirely sure why. Not when Kakashi-sensei has never passed them before. And particularly not now that she has at last secured a spot on Team 7, albeit a tentative and uncertain one. Nay, what kind of mission do you think we'll get today? Nay. Probably just another DD rank mission, Naruto.san. Naruto let out a sigh. Nay, Kakashi-sensei, why can't we do more interesting missions? Why don't you ask your father, Naruto.kun? Demo, wouldn't it be bad if he showed favoritism? The genin team slowed and moved to stand in front of Iruka and the Hokage, saying, "Ah, Team 7. Kakashi raised a hand in greeting and grinned. Hokage-sama. Sasuke moved a little, his posture unconcerned, while Hinata bowed and spoke to him timidly. Naruto, on the other hand, waved excitedly. Nay, what kind of mission do we get today? While rummaging through some papers, the Hokage grinned. Well, you can a choice now. You could either catch the daimyo wife's cat, do repairs for the elders, or plant potatoes. Naruto sank into a ball, crestfallen. Kakashi took a scroll sheepishly and pulled Naruto out, with Sasuke trailing behind. Hinata turned to them at the doorway behind them, bowed once more, and walked away. Oi, Naruto, Sasuke, Hinata. Kakashi sat them down in the grass after the genin trotted over to him in obedience. He waved a hand over the 3 folded pieces of paper that were strewn on the floor and said, "Let's try a little taijutsu exercise. I've written everyone's name on a piece of paper, and you'll each choose one. You'll spar with whoever's name is on the paper, using only taijutsu, and if we're lucky, everyone will have the chance to fight the other 2. Pick one." They each grabbed one and unfolded it slowly. "Ha, I'm going to kick your butt, Sasuke." Anyo, N Naruto.san, I got your name, HN. Kakashi grinned. Then, how about we have Sasuke and Hinata fight first? Hinata's face went white. Even though they had only been a team for 2 weeks, she had already witnessed her teammates' superior combat skills. When he fights, I hope he doesn't see the man he wants to kill. Sasuke's eyebrow went up. He hadn't had a good first impression of her, however, he acknowledged that she possessed some abilities after the scroll test, and he was intrigued by the taijutsu style she employed. She would be a good teacher to spar with. Hinata, do your best, oi, just watch them. Sasuke and Hinata turned to face one another. With a feeble smile, she turned on her Byakugan. She hurried over to him and pushed a hand against his chest. I might as well try to fight him if I'm going to. Sasuke jumped back nimbly, dodging her blow. He threw himself into a backflip, using the momentum to drive himself toward her, fist retracted. Dimly, Hinata thought, he's fast. He began briefly, then leaned back at the last second, his punch gliding over her. She sensed it. Since this was, quite honestly, the first time she had sparred in this manner with one of her teammates, she could feel the rush of combat. She arched her back and placed her hands on the ground as her head sailed towards the ground. She had always been flexible. She kicked off the ground with her feet and twisted backwards, testing her weight on her hands, until she landed again, this time in a slight crouch, a good distance away from her opponent. She returned to her taijutsu stance, which she had developed over weeks of training, eyes wary. They briefly circled one another before resuming their own barrage of attacks and engaging in a brief close quarters battle. While Sasuke alternated between traditional taijutsu and precisely timed kunai attacks, Hinata's hands blazed with concentrated beams of chakra. Hinata felt her confidence ebbing as she allowed her body to take control, attacking when she could and dodging when she had to. She still hadn't properly attacked him, and he didn't seem to be able to muster the will to actually try to avoid her blows. The renowned Uchiha survivor and #1 rookie of the year, he was too strong for her to defeat. After exchanging a final blow, the two jumped back together, returning to their starting positions and facing one another. She gasped a little. She was already exhausted from evading his attacks and her own discomfort at her powers. Unlike him, he was noticeably exhausted. Sasuke launched another attack, taking advantage of her brief pause. Hinata struggled, caught off guard, and found herself at yet another disadvantage. The match had been fairly close at one point, with Sasuke having a slight advantage, but now, encouraged by her stumbling weakness, he was pushing her back. It ended with a brief barrage of blows, and Sasuke got to his feet. In a sense, it was a victory, but Hinata pointed out that there were several closed tenketsus. She got up after a moment, and they moved back to the sidelines, where Kakashi, who had put his book aside, gave them a careful evaluation. Hinata-chan, that was so cool, way better than Sasuke. Teme. Sasuke stood quite a distance away from Naruto and Hinata as he started to discuss their battle. He had his hands by his sides, clenched just a bit. It was odd for him. She had avoided almost all of his blows until the very end, and she had attacked him with her own blows, using a taijutsu style that he had never seen before, but that had presented him with a real challenge of sorts. His chest tightened with a remote fear that, at this rate, she might one day surpass him, and his breathing was harsher than usual. She was definitely better than he had first believed. She had apparently slipped his notice, but he had never been impressed in the slightest by the other girl's abilities at the academy. Luckily, she didn't invest in a crush like so many others did, and it appeared that she shared his lack of interest. Sasuke gave a small smile. He might want to spend some time with this team. Nani, you'll teach me a new technique? Kakashi sighed and nodded once more. Hi, but only if you pay attention. Hinata grinned as she took a brief respite. Watching her teammates, and occasionally even their sensei, spar was always entertaining. Now, Naruto-kun, I noticed that you have a great deal of chakra. It's possible that your supplies exceed my own. Really? Dobi. Teme, you're just jealous because Kakashi-sensei is teaching me a new technique and not you. Hinata leaned back. This was not the first time she had heard this argument. She may eventually need to enter and silently call their names, pleading with them to stop. Sasuke would then sigh and wave Naruto away, who would yell in vain for another minute before turning to speak to Hinata. But for the time being, she was quite happy to. Hinata-chan, Naruto exclaimed as he rushed toward her, beaming with joy. Hinata stood with a firm and charming smile. Hi, Naruto-kun, Kakashi-sensei said he would teach me Kage Bunshin? Demo, isn't that a Junin level technique? Grinning, he leaned forward and poked his chest with his thumb. Perfect for someone like me. Anyo, Hinata-chan, hi, Naruto-kun. Is this a weed? When the dark-haired girl looked up in alarm, she saw her teammate holding a bunch of plants, roots and all, in a sheepish manner. Hinata appeared to be the only person capable of successfully completing the D-rank mission they were given, which was to assist a middle-aged woman with her garden. Naruto-kun, those are herbs, important medicinal herbs. Naruto looked more closely at the plants he was holding and asked, oh, medicine? How'd you know that? Well, I kind of want to be a Imed.nin, that's so cool, Hinata-chan. That's not the point, Hinata blurted out, turning her head away. Why? You'd better plant those back before. A pretty woman approached with a hopeful smile and said, Oi, kids, how are you doing? Hinata bit her lip a little. Based on what she had observed thus far, she was quite proud of her garden and protective of it. Naruto-kun, nay, Oba-chan, you sure have a lot of weeds here. She narrowed her eyes dangerously. Baka, those are my plants? Hinata rushed forward as she raised her hand to strike the genin. Anyo, I'm sure it was an accident, He was just careless. Naruto-kun was just about to help you plant them again, right, Naruto-kun. The blonde scowled as he eyed his pile of weeds, before turning to look at Hinata's anxious, beseeching expression and their customer's savage one. He said, hi, and then he turned to shout across the yard. Oi! Sasuke! Teme! Get over here and help me plant these. Hinata sighed and bowed to the woman. Gomen, I'm sure we'll be done soon. She squinted a little and leaned forward to take a closer look at the Hyuga. Well, you're a polite girl, wait, she said. Choking on her words, the older woman staggered back and gave her a covert glare. You're the... she exclaimed. Hinata stooped and rubbed her hands through the dirt while blinking back tears. She could hear Naruto and Sasuke shouting in the background, but... It isn't very important. Sasuke knelt down. He had no use for religion or depending on a higher power to accomplish tasks that he could complete on his own. Particularly after they had cursed him in that way. But he thought he should at least be grateful for some of the nicer things they gave him, like having someone besides the Dobi on his team. Unless, of course, using disparaging names during prayer was prohibited. He wasn't actually praying. Just pondering. They had established Team 7 a month prior. That damn scroll test was a month ago. To be honest, they hadn't done much in the past month. They had mostly just trained and finished a number of D-rank missions. He generally didn't care as much about the training. He would regularly do strength and speed training. Not much about jutsus or his rapid strength development. Useless. This past month, he assumed, would be seen by the others as some much needed social training. Social training, well, needed what? He wasn't going to win Itachi over to his way of killing him. After he dealt with his brother, he could handle that. In relation to that, he ought to go train, but perhaps he could just take a moment to reflect. Because he isn't expressing gratitude, praying, or engaging in any of the other polite behaviors that social training instills. He just wants to think right now. Naruto smiled. Being the son of the Hokage was something he enjoyed at times. For starters, he was well known and well liked by everyone, though he preferred to believe that this was due to his innate charm. Naturally, his father was the coolest person in the village because the Hokage was the coolest person there, which he was. At other times, it wasn't so wonderful to be the son of the Hokage. He just wanted to eat ramen and go to sleep after yet another typical day of training and missions. D. Rank, always D rank. Perhaps give it some thought. A month had passed since he was promoted to genin, and a full month had passed since that pointless scroll test, which he liked to believe he passed due to his obvious talent. He was certain that he meant that Sasuke. Tomi's passing was a surprise, but all he could do was smile when he told his 2-san about it. Then, without much prodding, Naruto had gone on a tirade about his teammates, praising Sasuke's not as cool fire jutsus and Hinata's very cool fighting style. He is then forced to consider his utterly unhip bunchins. Regardless of one's talent or level of confidence, doubt is a vicious thing that everyone encounters. There is a part of Naruto that understands Sasuke and Hinata are unique, unlike him. They are both skilled in taijutsu, chakra control, and other things that he isn't, and they can both do some cool things with their eyes. Though Sasuke can't yet. Naruto likes to think that's because he isn't very talented. Nevertheless, he takes pride in having picked up Kage Bunshin fast. Although he is still unable to do anything drastic, he is improving. The blonde-haired Dobi only gets one chance, oh no. His brain was suffering from all this thinking, even though his body was already exhausted. He just wants to go to sleep right now. Hinata reclined. She hadn't felt so at ease in a long time. Calm. It was strangely fulfilling to train until you were completely exhausted. It was hard to describe. That euphoric, mellow, and self-satisfied feeling that follows a long, intense workout. It was something she didn't know much about. Usually, the only emotion she experienced after training was the sharp disappointment that she hadn't performed well or advanced much. Fortunately, a month ago, everything had changed. A month had passed since that eye-opening scroll test and a month since she had graduated from the academy. In her heart, she believed that she had matured more in that brief month than she had in 12 years. Everything, all the time. Hinata was, for the time being at least, quite happy with D-rank missions and daily training, even though her teammates were becoming restless. In a sense, it all came back to Kakashi. Sensei. She still wriggled in amazement when she thought of his teamwork speech. Additionally, the past month had been almost entirely focused on teamwork. She loved it, even though it might not have seemed like much to the others. She hadn't experienced the joy of belonging or the warmth of a congrats in such a long time. She had learned their fighting techniques, but more significantly, she had learned their personalities. She was aware of when to step in and when to let them fight it out. She was aware of when Sasuke was nearing his limit in Naruto toleration, and when Naruto was nearing his limit in training. Hyuga Hinata had a romantic partner, alongside Team 7. She was aware that she was being overly attached, but she also understood that this tranquility would eventually come to an end. However, she isn't in the mood to consider that. She just wants to smile right now. With a slow exhale, Hinata began a barrage of blows directed at a straw dummy. Naruto was honing his chakra control skills and replenishing his chakra reserves at the edge of the training area. Sasuke was practicing his aim and training with various weapons off to the side. With his trademark orange book in his hands, Kakashi stood in the center. Kakashi looked up at the sky, nodded, and put his book away with some reluctance. The three genin halted their training and moved slowly in the direction of their sensei in silent agreement. Guess it's time to head over to the Hokage Tower. Hokage. Sama, are you sure about this? Yandaime grinned at his own teaching accomplishments and said, of course. They're a highly capable team with a very able sensei. And I have a very good reason to be accompanying them. Iruka scowled. No disrespect meant, but are you sure this isn't favoritism? The Hokage stopped grinning. When you have the survivors of two powerful clans who have both inherited equally powerful bloodline limits, it's difficult to call it favoritism. And, I do have certain duty to. Uzumaki Naruto arrived. N. Naruto.kun, Dobi. You want to fight? Kakashi gave a loud cough. Sensei, Iruka. Any new missions for us? The Hokage responded with a sigh. Iruka arched an eyebrow at the seemingly unrelated statement. Kakashi, I haven't been your sensei in over a decade. Was the Hokage attempting to postpone the task that he had assigned to Team 7? Apparently not, as the yellow-haired man shuffled some papers and cleared his throat before saying, I have a mission for you. Your team has an exceptional record and I feel that you are up to the challenge of a C-rank mission. Consequently, Iruka needed earplugs for the 123rd time. To be honest, he had thrown away his last pair when Naruto graduated to celebrate. Circa rank. Kakashi appeared a little taken aback by this recognition of his group. What would it consist of? So you accept? Hell yeah, we accept. N. Naruto.kun. A tiny smile played at the Hokage's lips as he sighed. I really don't know where he gets it from. Iruka gave a loud clearing of his throat. Ahem, the mission, Hokage. Sama? Then he added, accompanied by me. Yes. It would consist of delivering a scroll to Kumogakure. 1. Is 2.san embarking on a quest? With my group? He must have heard about Team 7's awesomeness? Is the Hokage departing from Konoha to guide us on a quest? What's happening? There's a problem here. No Kage would act in such a reckless or dangerous manner, but then again, father like son. The man with the yellow hair grinned broadly. Don't look so surprised. I have a few business matters with the Raikage, meaning I'm heading that way too. It's amazing how informal he comes across. I'm heading that way. He sounds like he's heading to the supermarket. Iruka continued to look down at the papers before him. I figured it would be a good opportunity to evaluate this team. Kakashi's gaze grew strained. Without a compelling reason, the Hokage would never simply abandon Konoha. There is a lot more fanfare involved in even meetings with other Kages. Kakashi raised his hand a little and said, Hokage, Sama. Another reason why I'll be leading Team 7's mission, Kakashi, I have a mission for you. A rank, with 2 others. The Hokage reached for a scroll. I'd like you to stay behind for a mission debriefing. After accepting the scroll, Kakashi took a step back. Yandaime gave a friendly smile in return. Then, Team 7, I expect to see you at the gates in 20 minutes. Anyo, Naruto.kun, do you know why the Hokage is coming with us? Naruto smiled at Hinata and shrugged. That's my 2.san for you. Their teammate had said nothing at all to address the question, and his words provided little solace, so Sasuke turned away in response, and Hinata scowled slightly. Naruto turned his attention between them. You're not worried, are you? My 2.san wouldn't do anything that could put Konoha in danger. He's the strongest shinobi in the village. N. No, Naruto.kun. I wasn't doubting that. He's a very good ninja. He's saved the village, many times, she said, lowering her head slightly as her gaze strayed to her stomach and the seal concealed by her heavy clothing. Naruto peered off into space. He smiled at them, and Hinata unconsciously returned the smile. Nay, I see him, he said. The yellow-haired man, like his son, grinned as he came toward them. Instead of wearing his Kage robes, he was dressed in a standard Junin uniform. The Hokage nodded to each of them before taking 2 scrolls from his pack. Naruto.kun. Sasuke.kun. Hinata. Chan. Holding tightly to the other, he opened one and placed it on the floor. We'll be traveling to Kumogakure to deliver this scroll, he said, holding up the sealed scroll, to the Raikage. If we were going for speed, we could get to the village in 3 days, but I've given this mission an estimated 10 days because I'd like to take this opportunity to assess your progress. The current plan is to camp at night and travel during the day. A particular formation isn't very important. I'll be in the lead and we'll be taking a very direct route. But, he said, focusing on Hinata, I am familiar with your eyes. While we're traveling, I'd like you to periodically scout the area. Hi, Hokage. Sama. Sasuke's eyes narrowed a little. He had seen his teammates' power firsthand and had always suspected it himself. Hinata wasn't a clan member, at least not one he knew of. There was a slim chance that she had a bloodline limit, but why was it never mentioned? No prestige or glory, no legends, not like the Sharingan. Do you have any questions? No? Then we're off, I guess? Naruto let out a deep sigh. 2-san. This is boring. Naruto, this is not so much an action-based mission as it is a guard mission. As you gain more experience, you'll see a lot of that. Demo, I thought since you were here. With a sigh, the Hokage looked up at the sky. We've been traveling for hours now. When Sasuke cocked his head, he saw a quickly disappearing shadow in the woods. What? Just a random description. It indicates that they aren't paying attention to Naruto. Oh, I thought that meant that there was someone in the woods who was prepared to kill someone. Oh, well, probably should change it to something less foreboding. And nothing has happened. Hinata moved the rucksack she was holding. And, Naruto-kun. Hi, Hinata-chan? He turned to face her and looked into Sasuke's bored eyes. Dobi. Let's set up camp. We're not in a hurry, Yondaime said with a laugh. Give a thunk. Give a thunk. Thwack. Naruto-kun. Hinata-chan, what is going on? The blonde boy glanced up and grinned rapidly. With a kunai hanging from her finger, she grinned at him and said, Your kunai missed. Her eyes were bright, and her voice was gently reprimanding. You should be more careful about your aim. Sorry, Hinata-chan, Naruto said, sheepishly rubbing the back of his head. I suppose I was preoccupied. After momentarily clouding her vision, she approached him and put a gentle hand on his shoulder, saying, Naruto-kun, you really don't have to train anymore. I think I'll stay a little longer. I got to train to be stronger, he said, scowling as he took another kunai out of his weapons pouch with his free hand. She grudgingly withdrew when he flashed his trademark smile, though she might have been encouraged by the ready kunai in his hand. Hinata smiled and backed away from the little clearing. Well, Naruto-kun, the food should be ready soon, so, she said, biting her lip a little. Don't push yourself too hard, we need you in case we're attacked, this is a C-rank mission after all. When Team 7 was first formed, Naruto naturally, and perhaps too hastily, assumed that Hinata would be the member who required the most training, the most assistance to become a great shinobi, and he watched her go before he sighed and threw his kunai once more. However, after sparring with Kakashi, Sensei in the scroll test and then Sasuke, Teme in taijutsu, he couldn't help but worry that Hinata might surpass him as a ninja. She was also an excellent cook. Hinata's ramen was good. Naruto-kun. The Yondaime stepped into the designated training area. Time to eat. Who prepared the food? His father winked and grinned, saying, Me. Naruto pulled a face and declared, So tonight I'm having instant ramen. I'm kidding. You think I could cook for 4 people? The Hokage snorted. Besides, I wouldn't let you have instant ramen for the 3rd night in a row, he said as he walked back towards their camp after Hinata had prepared dinner. The 4th. The night before we left, I trained a little more. I was too busy to eat. As he bit into a rice ball, Sasuke remarked, Obviously you wouldn't know how to pack a bento. This is good, Hinata-chan. Naruto pouted and snatched up the first thing he saw, then took a big bite. When he was done, he said. Better than anything you could make, Teme. Dobi. Play nice now. With a regretful sigh, Hinata said, Oh well, I planned ahead. I really wanted to avoid one of their arguments, harmless as it was. Behind her, she reached and said, Anyo, Naruto-kun. Hi, Hinata-chan. Hinata-cha. Arigo. He reached eagerly for the bowl she held out to him, and with a gleeful laugh, Naruto broke out a pair of chopsticks, which, quite honestly, he had just produced. It seems that his annoying orange outfit has a lot of hidden compartments, and triumphantly lifted a wave of ramen. Itadakimasu. He then started eating. Sasuke muttered, Thank you, and took another rice ball. You're welcome, Hinata said, her lips curving as she fixed her gaze on Naruto, who was contentedly unaware of their conversation. Correction. Hinata's ramen is excellent. The Yondaime took a scroll out of his pouch as the 4 sat in silence, broken only by Naruto's loud slurping, which caused Sasuke to glare at him and his father to give him disapproving looks. What's that scroll about, 2-san? This, he said, holding up the scroll. I can't tell you that now, he said. Why not? With a laugh, the Hokage said, All right, let's turn this into a lesson. You're supposed not to ask questions when you're assigned to escort something, be it an artifact or a scroll like this one. Well, Hinata blushed when Naruto's father smiled back at her. He means you shouldn't look at it, read it, or try and use it for yourself, Hinata said. Alright, that's about it. As a shinobi, you must be loyal to your village, and you will be trusted with certain things. You must have faith in your kage, which is me, and simply complete the task if you can demonstrate your worth. Did we need to hear that? Scowled Naruto. I was only interested in finding out what was in the scroll. Dobi. He just gave an explanation. We most likely aren't permitted to read that scroll, and Naruto.kun. It's most likely a secret or something higher up. As you say, Hinata. Chan. However, since this is only a C-rank mission, nobody will pursue us for it. The Yondaime tapped the scroll in his hand. We just need to deliver this to Kumogakure. You're all skilled shinobi, though, so you'd be devoted to me and trust me enough to just give it to you without asking. Sasuke turned his head away. Good shinobi, loyal enough, trust, Sasuke frowned. His gaze focused on the flames. His brother seemed to follow him everywhere he went, no matter what he did, and people's remarks seemed to make fun of him. Itachi had been a good shinobi, one of the best, but he wasn't very loyal and didn't trust many. He had shown time and time again that such qualities would only make someone weaker and burden them with needless feelings. The Yondaime looked at Sasuke, and he couldn't help but feel bad because everyone in the village knew about the Uchiha clan, the Uchiha massacre, and the only survivor. Konoha had once been a proud village with strong clans and powerful bloodlines. Where did you learn to cook, Hinata? Chan. Since my dad is the Hokage and everything, we usually have someone do it for us or we go out to eat, but you must have learned from someone, right? And this ramen is delicious. It was almost unfair that he had been placed on a team with someone so different from him, quiet where he was loud, shy where he was exuberant, lonely where he was friendly, alone, when he had perhaps the best father in the village, and normal, where she was a freak. Hinata smiled faintly. Naruto was a good person, a cheerful person who grew up normally. As he watched this mismatched trio mesh and collide in volatile patterns to form a team with more potential than any he had ever seen before, the Hokage sighed and felt suddenly very old. All of you ought to get some sleep. Kumogakure is less than a day away, and we ought to arrive in the village tomorrow. Little did he know that the lurking shadow in the woods would result in his imminent death, he said, shooing them into their tents so he could take the first watch. The Hokage sat down, squinting and turning his head slightly to stare into the darkened woods, feeling like a character from a fantasy novel. He chuckled softly before settling in for the evening. This will not be simple, hey. No, this is your idea of fun. Who could have predicted that our adversary would be Yellow Flash, the resident of Konoha? The perceptive could have seen this. I knew those eyes could do more than genjutsu. Oh, I understand. You still haven't taken the time to discover my entire skill set after all these years. So you're capable of more than just making people scream when they see you? Unfortunately, you have yet to garner yourself a reputation worthy of such a thing. Cruel as always. Yes, now stop this pointlessness. We have time. Do not forget our mission. Obviously. Remember to bring your eye drops. That was unnecessary. Leaning forward, Hinata smiled. She had never seen another village before, and this mission had been her first chance to leave Konoha. It looked fantastic. The shinobi guards at the door prevented Hinata from craning her neck in awe of the architecture and the massive structures, which were different but similar to those surrounding Konoha. Hi there. Before the guards could respond, Minato declared, we are envoys from Konoha. We have a meeting with the Raikage. The Raikage? We weren't informed about any envoys from Konoha, one said, raising an eyebrow. The Hokage rubbed his head sheepishly, but Sasuke's eyes narrowed. Ah, well, it was a bit of a rush. He claimed to be in a hurry, but why would they need the Hokage to travel all the way to Cloud to meet with him if his business matters were so unimportant that he didn't even tell the Raikage about them beforehand? With a small scroll tucked inside his Junin vest, Minato held it out and said, the signature is authentic and everything. He shrugged and returned the scroll to the yellow-haired man, saying, just know that they'll examine it more closely before they let you see the Raikage. The two ninja opened the scroll and scanned it. He's right. The stamp of Konoha and the signature of Yondaime Hokage. He remarked, fair enough, and proceeded through the now open gates, followed by Team 7. The Raikage? With a sigh, Cloud Chunin scanned the scroll before him once more and said, even with this scroll, and the Hokage's signature, I cannot assure you of anything. I highly doubt that the Raikage would abandon his duties to meet with someone who doesn't even have an appointment. Let him know that Uzumaki is here to visit him. Then, Minato scowled for a moment before smiling once more. Or even better, say, Yellow Flash. The Chunin nodded in confusion and then left, muttering that the name sounded familiar. The Hokage then turned to the genin and gave him a wink. If the man has any memory, he'll know who I am. As expected, a stately figure wearing cage robes left a few minutes later, followed by the Cloud Nin, who muttered that he could have simply picked up the visitors from Konoha and that Sama really shouldn't have come this far. Why don't I go out and welcome the guests myself? It's unusual for you to leave Konoha for anything other than emergencies, Hokage. Sama, the older man said, raising an eyebrow. As some of the ninjas wandering around the lobby responded loudly to the title, he couldn't help but smile. Well, he said, I had some issues to discuss with you. In addition, Yondaime grinned and said, I needed the fresh air. What are we doing, then? The words, Hokage. Sama said we could walk around a bit, explore Kumogakure. If we didn't go far, we're spoken. But Hinata abruptly closed her mouth in shock when she noticed that Sasuke and Naruto were both looking at her thoughtfully. All right, then. Naruto instantly woke up and said, let's go. Hinata. Chan. Sasuke. Teme. Sasuke reluctantly allowed himself to be pulled toward the village's stores and eateries, with Hinata dutifully following along while Naruto did the majority of the dragging. Dango. With great anticipation, Naruto walked toward a small shop and bought a dango. After removing one from the stick and enjoying it, he returned to his teammates. He held out 2 sticks of the treat and said, here, you can have them. Sasuke muttered, I don't like sweets, but reluctantly accepted it when his blonde teammate waved it in his face. Naruto cried out in triumph as he accepted the dango. Hey. There. Sasuke. You owe me now. Hinata grinned and took a bite of hers, and he snorted back. Thank you, Naruto-kun. Oh, no issue, Hinata. Chan? Don't worry, you owe me nothing, he said. She gave him a smile before taking another dango bite. Now, why are you actually here, Hokage? Sama. It seems like you don't miss anything, Minato said with a laugh. As a Kage, I understand how devoted a person is to his village, and I am aware that Konoha is wealthy and strong enough to make an alluring target. Especially if their Hokage isn't there. Raikage. Sama. Those genin, aren't they? One strikingly resembles you. Yes, I often understand that. Everyone claims that he acts like his mother and looks like me. Poor kid, said the Raikage sternly. Hey. Yondaime pulled out a scroll and said, first off, this scroll is the official document that I assigned to be guarded. He leaned back casually, totally relaxed, and said, but I did have something to discuss with you. After taking it, the Raikage pulled it open and looked over the words before putting it down. That is rather anticlimactic. Minato smiled, I understand. Declarations of war are far more exciting than reports on agriculture. Get to the point. Have you heard reports of a group of rogue ninja? He asked gravely. A few suspicious reports have surfaced recently, but most people ignore the idea of these powerful criminals banding together because it seems so extreme. All S-class missing nin. And you think they're real? This many power. Hungry ninjas who betrayed their village can't be planning anything small, he said, leaning forward. I'm actually not so concerned about them at the moment, but rather what they're doing. Furthermore, the individual who possesses the authority and power to manage them is not considering global peace. So you travel to Kumogakure just to share your small intuition with me? I'm flattered, really, said the Raikage with a sly smile. It's more than a hunch, said the man. I've been a ninja for over 2 decades. I can tell when there are people following me. The Raikage arched an eyebrow and his eyes grew piercing. Are you following me? For what reason? The idea that they are pursuing the Hokage is absurd. I can think of a few things they might be after, Minato said, closing his eyes and shaking his head. Then, I'll believe your judgment. I take it you'll be leaving Kumogakure soon? Yeah. He grinned. Can't stay away from Konoha too long. Be careful then, wouldn't want your Sandaime to have to come out of retirement. Old man Sarutobi would kill me if I made him do something like that, he said, pulling a face. In any event, he would most likely suffer a mild heart attack himself. You always were a strange one, Minato-san, the Raikage said, raising an eyebrow. As he gazed out the window, his smile dimmed. It's been a while since anyone has been able to act like this. The 2 great leaders of their village sat in silence for a long moment before Minato turned back to him and smiled his famous smile. For a brief moment, the Raikage felt compelled to recall this grin, this expression, the face of one of the greatest ninjas in history. Well, is that it? Are we truly finished here? With a heaving sigh, Naruto pouted and plopped down in the road. We have only been in Kumogakure for a day, 2-san. Let's stay a little while longer, shall we? In response, Minato ruffled his son's hair and rolled his eyes. Hey, Hinata-chan, could you please explain to this dope why we are unable to stay longer? Hinata bit her lip a little and then continued, we've been gone almost, 5 or 6 days now. At the start of the mission, Hokage Sama told us that we would have a limit of about T.10 days. She paused, looking at the Hokage to make sure. Uncertain whether she was being cheeky or not, she stammered out, we shouldn't waste time or stay here too long. So Naruto, ready to go? Minato winked at Hinata and said, correct. With a sudden smile, the blonde ninja sighed and hefted his pack back onto his shoulders. Well, back to Konoha. With a smile, the Hokage turned to face Sasuke and said, Sasuke-kun, have you had enough Kumogakure yet? All set to go? Naruto made a face. Stupid Teme, too good to give an actual answer. He nodded once and grunted in agreement. Minato grinned as he glanced at them, realizing that he was growing too old for this. A stately figure approached the four as they were leaving, followed by 2 bewildered and begging ninjas. Hokage. Sama. Come say goodbye to us, Raikage. Sama? With a cheeky grin, Minato pointed to the robes and hat. And dressed up too. In contrast, you make me feel inferior. Even at this young age, the dark-haired one was a formidable figure, and the sight of the blonde boy couldn't help but bring a half-smile to his face. The Raikage shook his head before turning to face the 3 genin. So this is the genin team that is temporarily led by the Hokage. Anyone could see his father in him, but few could tell that there was a shinobi lying in wait, and a formidable one, if he tried. His gaze fell on the white-eyed girl, her eyes darting around while she bit her lip. The Raikage said, I can see why, and he gave his fellow Kage his full attention. With a shrug, Minato said, keep the village safe, his voice becoming quieter without sacrificing the command he had cultivated over the years as the Hokage. As he watched the 4 leave Kumogakure, the Raikage nodded, lowering his hat a little, but he said nothing he felt he should say, something he wanted to say. And he saw the Konoha shinobi set out on what would turn out to be their most extensive expedition to date. Stately and immobile, the Hokage monument stood as a testament to the strength of the Hokage and his people, serving as both a literal and figurative guardian of the village, constantly keeping watch over Konoha's future. There, the village's best shinobi would be permanently preserved. They were great, in part. At least in part because it was the only thing the village could do to repay these people who loved them so much that they knew they would eventually give their lives for it. A piece of them would be sacrificed for the village, whether it meant living a life devoid of meaning or passing away quietly. All those who ever held the title of Hokage knew that the Hokage monument might one day be all that remained of them in the village, whether they did it voluntarily and joyfully or reluctantly and regretfully. Sandaime snorted softly to himself and lowered the Hokage hat, which he hadn't worn in years and had been very dubious when Yondaime had approached him, requesting a short vacation and asking if he would please come out of retirement for a few days. Sandaime exhaled a thin stream of smoke. He looked so much younger in stone. It had been years since he wore this hat. He had never given the monument much thought. He might discuss filling in the cracks that were starting to appear in the stone with Minato when he got back. Hinata discovered that they were moving much more quickly. It had taken them almost 4 days to get to Kumogakure, and even though it was only their second night back on the road, she could already tell that they had advanced into the country of fire. The 3 genin appeared somewhat relieved to be sleeping as they set up camp for the night. Lifting a canteen of water, Minato said, cheers, to your first C-rank mission, and to my first C-rank mission in over a decade. Wait till we tell everyone we did a C-rank, Naruto exclaimed, laughing loudly. Hinata-chan, isn't it fantastic? As she put away some of the dinner's cooking supplies, she grinned and said, it's a good first step, Naruto-kun. We ought to receive more C-rank missions, 2-san. We can do them, they're not difficult. With a wry smile, Minato stood up and shook his head, saying, let's talk about that when we get back to Konoha. I'm sure Kakashi would be absolutely thrilled to hear that. How about taking the first shift, Hinata? I'll be out shortly to relieve you. Good night, Hinata, Naruto said as he vanished into the tent. Sleep well, Naruto-kun. Sasuke-kun. After pausing to give her a nod, Sasuke followed Naruto. With a silent exhale, Hinata smiled and took a seat beside the fire's dying embers. Time went by. The forest was silent except for the night's typical sounds. The fire flickered, defining her figure with long shadows on the ground. Her eyes grew heavy and her thoughts wandered. Hinata activated her Byakugan and threw them around the forest, blinking frantically and shaking herself awake because she still wasn't used to being on guard, especially when there didn't seem to be much danger. However, what would Hokage Sama say if he came out and discovered her sleeping? Nothing. With a sigh, she eased up and turned back to face the fire, holding her chin up. That's how Minato discovered her. Hinata. The Hyuga leapt to her feet, her eyes blazing, and her tense figure relaxed as she saw the Hokage, blushing slightly. Gomen, H. Hokage. Sama. I didn't see you. Yeah, I did see you, but... No, I'm glad you remained vigilant in spite of everything. However, you shouldn't have assumed that I was the real person when you first saw me, he said, his eyes becoming somewhat serious. Many people can be duped by a simple henge. So, he went on, what could you ask me to make sure I am the Hokage? You. She said, her forehead furrowed in shock. What is, Naruto-kun's favorite food? Hinata. Chan, ramen, he chuckled. He smiled and turned back to the tent, saying, that is both clever and amusing, Hinata. He sat down next to her, across from the fire, and said, ramen, and every single flavor of it as well. How's the weather out here, W? Well, there hasn't been anything so far, she shrugged, looking down and away. I didn't sense any danger. Hinata waited for Minato to say something, but he hesitated and scowled, saying, okay. There was so much he could say to this girl, so much he wanted to say. As the Hokage, I have an obligation to my people, Hinata. To ensure their happiness, she gave a cautious nod. Her Byakugan and this mission had encountered each other only a few times before, but she had always wondered about the Kyuubi, this strong beast that was sealed inside her, who had done it, and why. She thought she knew, but she wasn't sure, so she kept it in the back of her mind. Now, the Yondaime was asking her if she was happy. Hokage. Sama, Konoha is a beautiful village, Hinata. I think it is. I believe that a lot of people share this opinion, however, it's not flawless. Yes, she said quietly, letting out a sigh, I know that. Additionally, I believe I'm performing fairly well in my role as Hokage. Not flawless, though. Her silence said it all, and Minato closed his eyes, hoping he wouldn't make a mistake because he owed her this much, at the very least. Hinata said abruptly, nobody's perfect, and when he turned to face her, she gave him a solemn smile, her eyes shining in the firelight. I have very little to say to you. I'm not sure what I could say to someone like you, who has most likely had a very different life than I have. I apologize. If only to say I understand, I wish I could have gone through a small portion of what you have. Hinata decided that this would probably seem odd in retrospect, but that it seemed perfectly right at the moment. She, a nobody genin, was speaking to the Hokage, and he was apologizing to her. She believed she knew why, even though neither of them had brought it up and neither of them was entirely certain the other was talking about the same thing. Thank you, Hinata said, raising his eyebrows in surprise. Thank you for providing me with this opportunity and for ensuring Konoha's safety. No one could ever ask you for more than that. Nobody's perfect, but, she paused, but continued anyway, feeling more courageous and terrified than she had ever been. I think if I had to choose, I would want you to lead our village. Minato laughed quietly to himself and smiled warmly. Thank you. Minato was left to think about this odd, courageous young girl who was starting to take her first steps into the light when Hinata finally stood up and withdrew to her tent. We're almost home, Naruto exclaimed, triumphantly lifting his arms in the air. Less than a day away from Konoha, now. We would almost be there by now if the Dobi had actually decided to wake up this morning, said Sasuke. Naruto shifted his pack and moaned, geez, Sasuke. I said I was sorry. Besides, it wasn't like you came to wake me up. You probably drugged my food or something. Then Hinata sighed, Naruto-kun. She had been having a restless night because she kept mentally reciting what Yondaime had said. In a way, it was pleasant, but she wasn't positive she hadn't been dreaming. He almost seemed to be apologizing for something he felt responsible for but didn't do. Getting an apology was nice. Stop. Suddenly, the whole team froze. The breeze slowed and the whole forest fell silent. The Hokage had halted them all, his body tensing as the cold fear of who his opponent would be and why they were here surged through him along with the adrenaline of an impending battle. Two figures materialized in front of them, lethally and lithely, as though from a mirage. Two straw hats were left on the ground, and black cloaks fluttered in the imaginary wind. It seems there's no point in hiding anymore, is there? Hinata experienced three simultaneous events in a split second. As it approached its adversary, a kunai carrying more than just a sharp blade split the air with its whistle. Sasuke's savage, gut-wrenching scream as he sped toward his goal. Hinata's world collapsed around her, and she felt as though everything she had ever known was coming to an end. Minato vanished in an instant. It was called Yellow Flash of Konoha. He appears to have lived up to his reputation even years after the war. As soon as he saw the 3 black commas spinning in a sea of blood, the blood of his father, mother, and family, Sasuke stopped screaming and became enraged. He had known right away who it was. He hadn't spent 5 years recalling his brother's crimson, blank eyes and his painful, emotionless voice, only to freeze when he saw him. Even though Sasuke wasn't quite prepared to murder his brother, he would die if he didn't try. His way was quickly blocked by a second, more formidable figure. Standing partially in front of Sasuke, Minato stared at his adversaries. "Stay back." He gritted his teeth, suppressing a scathing reply. He had no desire to remain behind. However, he would. Because the Hokage's voice had that ninja-like sound to it. One who was years ahead of him in knowledge. As a result, he remained behind and moved slightly away from Hinata and Naruto. The shark-like man smiled and said, "Yondaime-kun, you're being very impulsive today. You should know best that attacking hastily could lead to many accidents." In response, Minato gave a small half-smile. He glanced at the other silent man and said, "A shinobi rarely asks before attacking. And I know enough about you to know that you're dangerous. So you've heard about me. I'm so pleased." The Hokage paused, seemingly considering every response to his next statement, before continuing, "And Uchiha Itachi. Missing nin from Konohagakure. Hoshigaki Kisame. Missing nin from Kirigakure." Hinata took a deep breath. Uchiha Konohagakure. She was aware that Sasuke-kun had no family. He lived alone, just like her. However, who? This man had the same name as him and looked a lot like him. Who was he? Why had his appearance caused Sasuke to react so violently? "I have an ambition that I have no intention to leave as just a dream. The revival of my clan, and to kill a certain man." She went pale. Not right now, not so soon after they joined forces. However, the battle had already started, and it was now impossible to avoid it. Waiting was the only thing left to do. Scraps of mutilated cloth fluttered in the air as a thick, ripping sound pierced the atmosphere. Kisame raised his legendary sword, and the Yondaime stood, largely unconcerned. "Samahata," he uttered, smiling while brandishing the sword. He continued, "It doesn't cut," and his lips stretched awkwardly, "It shaves." With a pleasant smile, Minato said, "One of the legendary 7 swords of the mist, held only by the 7 swordsmen? Good for you." Swinging Samahata in a broad arc, Kisame let out a loud laugh and said, "Ha, Itachi, let me take him. I haven't had a good battle in a long time." Itachi gave him a quick glance and arched an eyebrow. He remarked, "For now," and took a half-step back from his companion. The Yondaime rushed forward in a blur. With a kunai drawn, he advanced quickly on his alleged adversary. Unconcerned, Kisame watched him come closer. He didn't quickly dodge a potential attack until the very last second. "I'm disappointed, Yondaime-kun," he said, still holding Samahata tightly as he appeared a few paces away. "I expected something more exciting from the legendary Yellow Flash. Are you holding back, or are the years getting to you?" Itachi silently observed, mentally analyzing each move they made. If they were caught off guard, even the smallest change in Yondaime's stance could be disastrous. Kisame was no pushover, of course. With Samahata at the ready, the renegade ninja materialized in front of Yondaime as if reading Itachi's mind. It swiftly cut through the air, snagging a stray piece of cloth that fluttered weakly in the air. Hinata let out an unconscious gasp. Initially terrified of the swordsman himself, she now found herself flinching at the sight of that sword, thin sheets of lethal metal stacked one on top of the other to create a horrifying sight. Admittedly, she was terrified that this would go horribly wrong and that the Yondaime's years of serving as Hokage during peace would have weakened his abilities. From behind Kisame, Minato appeared as though in a dream. Fuden. Kiroi Shippu. Wind whipped around the area in a blinding whirl. Only a few drops of water were left after it cleared, and Kisame was gone. San. Naruto paused, gasping for air and opening his eyes wide. Did you?" "No," said the Yondaime in a low voice. Kisami's voice reverberated throughout the room. "Ha, so you knew?" Minato gave himself a quiet snort. "As I thought. The entire time you were fighting with a water clone." Sweden. Bakusu Shoha. The land was inundated by an avalanche of water that encircled the area. Watching the waves of water settle just beyond them, the three genin stumbled away instinctively. Minato stood watching the figure slightly off to the side after navigating himself on top of the water with ease. When Kisame appeared, the actual Samahata leaned lightly on his shoulder. Suikoden. Suikoden no Jutsu. The water rose and took the shape of a terrible shark, rushing quickly toward Yondaime. As the water rushed at him at a terrifying rate, Minato stiffened and waited. It was not that he was unfamiliar with water jutsus. He had seen them many times before. However, it was clear that this one had a lot more speed and power than any he had previously encountered. The Yondaime released a concentrated amount of wind-based chakra from his hands, aiming it at the center of the shark, just seconds before the water would have destroyed him. It broke easily, the jutsu disintegrating under the wind chakra's quick power. The water shivered as it readapted to its surroundings and crashed back into the pseudo-lake. Kisame looked on, utterly indifferent. The renowned yellow flash of Konoha was unaffected by ordinary water jutsus. That should come as no surprise. Itachi gazed. It was obvious that neither wanted to challenge the other's actual authority, so they were both holding back. The battle had lasted long enough. You're such fools. Yondaime tensed up and pulled back a little, idly dabbing at a bead of perspiration. Why would you say that? After chuckling, Kisame turned to face Itachi. He turned back to Minato and asked, they still really have no idea, do they? Think about why we came. Why? He narrowed his eyes. I have an idea, but please, enlighten me. We're not interested in you, Yondaime-kun. You, or your kid or the other boy. Sharp flashes came from Sasuke's eyes. Thus, it had nothing to do with him, his brother had returned. Thus, in the eyes of his brother, whom he had once chased for entirely different reasons, he was that unimportant. Naruto scowled. Not him, not Sasuke, not his father. Even though he didn't receive the highest grades at the academy, he was still able to figure out that. Minato suppressed a shout. He wasn't sure whether he wanted her to know or if she knew. He had lived for 12 years, a figure with wide eyes and teary eyes as she wept for the lives that would be lost in the sacrifice a child would make, while a shadow of guilt and doubt tormented his thoughts. He had waited for 12 years, knowing that he couldn't escape the monster he had created and that fate would bring him here in the end. He felt as though he would stop at nothing to save her, to spare this child from the weight he had placed on her shoulders. Hinata. Hinata's respiration accelerated. What did he mean by his words, the words of that shark? Like, powerful, and terrifyingly so, man? We came for one thing. The demon. She let out a loud gasp, a jerking, terrified, strangled cry. As that one word struck her with the force of the hate it held, the years and years of repressed annoyance, grief, and suffering, her chest constricted and her throat became dry and hoarse. When Hinata touched her cheek, she was unable to distinguish between a tear and a cold sweat of fear. A demon? Hinata cried out in a choked voice, and Naruto turned to face her. Why demon? Demon, demon, demon. He said, that's stupid, without really understanding it. When everyone looked at him, he froze, and the shark man grinned, saying, Hinata's not a demon. Kisame snorted and said, not a demon. Not too bright of a kid, I see. Kisame. Yeah, Itachi-san. I know, don't take it too far. You can stop there, as far as I'm concerned, the Hokage said, glancing back at Hinata, who was standing there staring at Itachi and Kisame while her fingers were clenched and instinctively twisted around one another. He swung his sword absently and shrugged, saying, no, didn't you learn, Hokage? Sama, that the longer you keep a secret, the worse it is when it comes out. It's been 12 years that this one's been festering. Let's slice the wound open before it infects. Itachi remarked, it's been 12 years since that night of disaster, of death. 12 years since the last of the Biju were sealed. 12 years since a girl was born. Hinata mused drearily, me. With the others looking at him anxiously, Kisame shifted his sword and said, 12 years ago, Kyuubi Kitsune, the 9-tailed fox, the most powerful of the 9 Biju, attacked the Fire Country. It was fought by our great Yondaime-kun. Would you care to finish the rest? Hinata turned to face Minato with wide eyes, and Minato let out a breath, shortening it. He was unable to recall the last time he had felt this sickening sensation in his stomach, one that left him feeling hopeless and utterly miserable. Then he recalled. It had been 12 years since he had experienced this feeling. Hinata, he coughed, not wanting to ruin his final opportunity, and his voice sounded scratchy. He couldn't bear to look into her eyes, and he couldn't even consider what his son would think of him going forward. I'm sorry. Konoha was being destroyed. And I knew only a newborn baby would be versatile enough to adapt to the Kyuubi's chakra. I'm sorry. The strong Hokage halted and took a painful swallow. I've watched you for 12 long years, and I've never had the courage to say anything I don't deserve. Naruto's gaze shifted from Hinata to his father, and he said, San, I don't understand. Hinata, what about Hinata? What do you mean, 12 years ago? What about this Kyuubi? Hinata's voice interrupted his tirade with, Naruto-kun. She looked back with pained, sorrowful eyes when he looked at her. She spoke in a soft, tired voice. She turned to face the Yondaime, who gazed at her with wide, regretful eyes. 12 years ago, when I was born, the Kyuubi attacked our village. Your father sealed the demon into me to defeat him. No, you mean, Naruto was scowling and breathing erratically as he attempted to take in all of this unexpected knowledge. Sasuke remarked, you are a jinchuriki. Hinata glanced at him and winced. She stammered, Sasuke-kun, I am sorry, as he turned away from her and looked at Itachi once more. Many things were explained, Sasuke thought. The Hokage leading their mission, her unusual power, the odd looks she got from the villagers, the fact that she had no family, maybe even her eyes. Although it did not entirely explain his brother's presence, Sasuke scowled. Hinata exclaimed, my family, abruptly. When he sadly shook his head, she said, Hokage. Sama, please, I must have had, a family. What happened? Well, this is touching and everything, Kisame said caustically, interrupting the quartet. But shall we get on? Minato shook his head as he turned to face him. What a callous way of revealing such a thing. You never even stopped once to think. What we thought about, said Itachi, was our mission, Kisame. The man who resembled a shark laughed back. Right, Itachi-san. He clasped his hands together, Samahata skillfully holding them so they did not cause any strain. Sweden. Daibakufu no Jutsu. The four were torn apart as a tiny cyclone rose from the water and tore through them. The genin stumbled away, sloshing awkwardly through the water and being carried away by the wave's force as Yondaime braced himself and leapt to the side. He gritted his teeth. This was a dangerous situation. Two of the most notorious ninjas of their generation faced off against three inexperienced genin who were all just so happened to be going through some kind of traumatic event. So, with the slightest of smiles, he thought, attacking first would be the only way to gain the initiative in combat. Furthermore, a skilled ninja could not really do anything else in this circumstance. So he did just that. Kenkaze, Kisame was completely encircled by a blade of wind that whipped through him. Kisame appeared just beyond the wind cyclone and teleported away in a puff of smoke. He moved toward Minato and swung Samahata in a broad arc. Minato dodged the blow and returned fire with a barrage of shuriken and kunai. Kisame took a half step back and batted them away with ease. Just then, another barrage of munitions poured down from the sky. For a moment, Kisame snarled as he looked up. He should have anticipated a trap. He executed two jutsus simultaneously with ease. A challenging water jutsu and a basic replacement technique. Minato was surrounded by a wave. He squinted. This one looked different, or at least it had something that other Sweden jutsus didn't. As the water rose above him, enclosing him in a circular wall, he waited. Naruto yelled because he had never seen the yellow flash in combat before, even though he knew his father was the greatest ninja. There will never be one as genuine as this one. He surveyed his surroundings. Sasuke's body tensed and his fingers twitched as he glared at his brother, totally absorbed in the moment. Still soaking wet, Hinata struggled to maintain her balance and lost focus, her gaze flitting from the Yondaime to her teammates. Never in his life had he felt so worthless. Minato was frowning and his eyes were creased in intense concentration as the walls of water crashed down. He knew that something was supposed to happen, but something was wrong. The sole query was. A few drops of water hung in the air and began to slowly fall on the Hokage. Still soaked, he was ready to jump away without considering the last of the water. He moved in a sudden rush of energy, only to discover that his motions were restricted. He twisted and tried to call forth chakra, but his reserves were low and his reflexes were slow. Aramasu Sweden. Minato grinned icily and said, so the water is fused with chakra to cling and wash away energy and chakra, I see. As Samahata walked up to the Hokage, Kisame pulled him into a ready position and said, you're trapped, Yondaime-kun. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. As dozens of Narutos appeared, puffs of smoke engulfed the area. With loud, coordinated yelling, they descended upon Kisame. When had Naruto learned about Kage Bunshin? Minato's eyes widened. And how long had he had enough chakra to execute such a powerful jutsu? He grinned. Despite his propensity for spotting talent, Kakashi had turned into such a troublemaker. When they got back, he assumed he would have to thank his errant pupil. As Naruto unleashed the jutsu he had been practicing for weeks, he leapt towards his father and Kisame, and Hinata watched in horrified awe. She smiled shakily. He had known he could pull it off. He was something else, someone different, and she had always known it. Naruto.kun. Take care. Naruto jumped away from the three to face Kisame, and Sasuke's head turned to see it. He has no chance, but he would still pray for him, he supposes. He looked back at his brother, but there was nothing there. No, foolish little brother, your teammate has such a high-level jutsu, and is showing courage in the face of danger. What have you proved so far? Itachi, Sasuke growled, his gaze fixed on the ominous figure that appeared before them out of nowhere. He heard Hinata yelp in surprise behind him. She instinctively started to back away, but she hesitated as she made a move towards Sasuke. Sasuke-kun, go, he said. This is my battle. Hinata bit her lip and hesitated. She felt completely worthless because Sasuke was now facing this other man while Naruto had found the courage to save his father. She was the target of both of their opponents. This is my fight. Don't interfere. Hearing the underlying pain in Sasuke's voice, Hinata nodded while swallowing painfully. She prayed for their safety as she hurried off, giving them both one last look. Sasuke looked back at the man in front of him. He hurried forward, hands moving in the familiar seals, ignoring any small talk. Kaden. Gukakyu no Jutsu. Itachi looked on indifferently as the flames raced in his direction. Sweden. Suishi no Jutsu. Sasuke frowned as the flames were doused by a tiny stream of water. No longer caring, he charged at Itachi. His once brother is standing here, unconcerned about his team or the other ninja. Itachi kicked him quickly as he got closer, slamming his foot into his brother's stomach after lifting his knee a little. Sasuke let out a choked gargle and was thrown back, slamming into a nearby tree. He stood up again, panting, his eyes crazy and focused on his brother. He was unable to see or think. All he knew was that he was facing the man he intended to murder, and there was nothing he could do. The yelling, screaming, and charging never stopped. Itachi continued to punch, kick, and throw him away ineffectively, blocking every one of his attacks. He doesn't even make the effort to. Itachi gave his brother a chilly look before quickly putting his hands together and sealing. Let's end this. Kaden. Hausenka no Jutsu. Sasuke was hit by tiny flashes of flame. Breathing heavily, he watched them, ducked, staggered a little, and waited, moving as they got closer. He caught a few stray ones and soaked it in water before continuing. Itachi observed. He could fight on without any trouble. Already, Sasuke's body was slowing down, and his reflexes were having trouble responding. But his movement had a certain quality. Something that made the fireballs predictable. Itachi's brows lifted a little in surprise. He increased the fireball's speed. And we'll observe what transpires. Sasuke gasped. The direction of this battle was obvious, still, though. Pay attention. Focus. Get moving. The Uchiha began to move swiftly to avoid a particularly large flame that was speeding towards him, and it fell ungracefully to the ground. His eyes were wide, but his head was down. There was a new vitality in him, but his breath came in short gasps. His eyes were red when he raised his head. Sharingan. Itachi tilted his head and gave Sasuke a similar look. Foolish little brother, is this the first time you've activated the Sharingan? Weak. Stumbling toward the water, Sasuke gazed at his reflection. He was met with red eyes that were blazing with the Uchiha's strength and his brother's hatred. He slowly turned his head in Itachi's direction. His eyes were burning as he looked directly at his brother. Uchiha, Itachi, I've waited for this day. I've lived for this day. For the day I would kill you. Sasuke bounded toward Itachi with a last surge of speed. After violently twisting his arm, the elder Uchiha kneed him in the stomach. Sasuke's head was filled with pain, and blood was dripping from his mouth. Pain that went beyond the physical. Pain that resulted from weakness and the years of training for it to only reach this point. With dark eyes, Itachi grabbed Sasuke by the neck and slammed him against a tree. As though sharing a horrible secret, Itachi leaned forward and asked, "You are weak. Why are you weak?" He drew back, then slowly opened his eyes to reveal 3 ferocious black tomo. Because you lack hatred. With the Sharingan gone, Sasuke's eyes snapped open. His world turned black, and then took on a horrifying hue. The hue of hate, the hue of blood. The sky took on a crimson that was eerily familiar and dark. Then he had no knowledge. Ah, Yandaime-kun, what will you do now? Kisame gave the blonde ninja a smile. Minato grimaced and panted as she swiftly avoided another water blast. Shouting and choking on his words, Naruto was imprisoned inside a water bubble and pounded at it in vain. Minato cursed, damn. In his life, he could only recall one other conflict in which so many of his valued people were in such grave danger, and no other instances in which he had encountered such lethal foes. Stupid boy, you are, Naruto. He could feel Hinata somewhere behind him. Since she was the one they wanted, he prayed that she wouldn't try to help him by imitating Naruto's actions. He couldn't handle that at the moment. The word, fighting, was used objectively to describe Sasuke's battle with Itachi. Minato grimaced. Given their history together and their startling disparity in skill, that was probably the worst-case scenario. He was somewhat familiar with the Sharingan, but not so much with the Mangekyo. Nevertheless, he was aware that he would not want to be the victim of it. Minato was so preoccupied that he failed to notice the agitation in the water beneath his feet. He failed to notice that Hinata was crying as she watched both fights because she was experiencing such intense hopelessness, hate, and despair. Tell me, Kisame said, gesturing to Minato with Samahata. Why do you fight so hard for a demon? Demon. It was there. Her entire life was dictated by that one word. That one word would bring great leaders to their knees and villages to ruin. Everything she held dear would be destroyed by that one word. Sasuke is defending his family by fighting his brother. In order to save his father, Naruto fought a foe he knew he couldn't defeat. Even though she was the source of all his suffering, Minato continued to protect her. Too cowardly to intervene, too scared to scream, Hyuga Hinata stood there and watched as the people she cared about the most gradually deteriorated. Why? She murmured, her eyes glistening and darting around wildly. She cried out in agony, hunching over and dropping to her knees. Why? Why do you call me a demon? Something inside of her screamed and cried and expressed a desire for freedom. Hinata had never complained, cried out, or spoken up since she was a child. Her strength had never existed. She wished she didn't tremble so much when speaking. She didn't want to be shouted at once more, as though she didn't belong. She was stumbling along behind the group. What a freak she was. Before it gradually darkened, she glowed, her entire being illuminated by pure chakra. A ferocious red chakra gradually encircled her. When Hinata's eyes opened after she screamed, the dazzling white had turned to a dark hue. The hue of hate, the hue of blood, the demon's color. Minato swerved instantly, seeing Hinata engulfed in the red chakra. As the terrifying creature reared, his breath caught. As he watched the lovely girl he knew crouch and her body give in to the power within without realizing it, his chest constricted. He was instantly taken back in time by 12 years. Wait until the Yandaime gets here. Keep it from approaching our village any further. Is there no other option? A newborn? A baby just born? It's the only option. Please, nothing more needs to be done. Nothing more needs to be done, however, fight. Behind him, he heard Kisame withdraw, shattering the water prison that encircled Naruto. With a gasp, the boy staggered off, splashing through the water. Hinata, T2.san, what? Naruto hesitated, but the strongest ninja in Konoha said, go. Get Sasuke and get out of here. There was no room for debate. But, Hinata, what a dumb boy. Get Sasuke and leave. He was not prepared for this, even though he loved the child. As Minato heard Naruto hurry off, he lowered his head and sighed softly. Avoid any distractions. Nothing could possibly divert him from his objective. The ferocious red figure lowered its head and gazed around with wide, feral eyes that flashed. The chakra flared and intensified, and then she quickly ran away. Remains of chakra smoldered in the water as feet slammed quickly and heavily onto the surface. The creature rushed in the direction of an invisible target. Then a jolt of energy knocked him away. She cried out in pain and then stood up again, growling fiercely. Inside, it was easy to see Hinata, who had changed entirely. At this point, she wouldn't think twice about harming someone or destroying something, but Hinata was still there. On the defensive, Minato jumped away. As his body naturally shifted away from her attacks, he repeated those words repeatedly in his mind, making them his mantra. A part of him, one that he would probably come to regret, wanted to attack the Kyuubi and use the Yandaime Hokage's full power. A greater portion, however, cautioned him that he would never be able to forgive himself if he did. Because the Kyuubi that confronted him now was not at all the same as the one he had battled 12 years prior. Somehow he had to keep her in check. The demon would take control of her body unless he could calm her and drive the Kyuubi away. Nothing would stop it after that. The Kyuubi screamed and ran in his direction. Minato gathered chakra and attempted to teleport away, but he was encircled by ferocious red chakra tendrils. Hinata's face twisted into an agonized, painful expression, and her eyes glowed inside, empty and blank. Even though it was eating away at her soul, the chakra encircled her and enveloped her body as though it were protecting her. For a moment, a laughing face shaped itself in the chakra, and the Yondaime began. Even though it vanished in an instant, he could still see it clearly, from that terrible night years ago to this moment, where it was mocking him for all his flaws. You might have prevailed in the initial conflict. Can you win the war, though? He winced as thin chakra blades whipped at him, leaving his uniform stained with blood. Minato twisted, slipped out of her hold, and leapt away. Doden. Doruki Gashi. He and Hinata were separated by a solid barrier as rock emerged, shattering the water. It would be more of a diversion than anything else. Chakra cut through it clumsily, sending rock and dirt flying in all directions. Once more, he ducked, swerving and moving quickly, totally defensive. He had no idea how he would drive the demon out. All he needed to do was wait until he could. Now. Sweden. The water beneath the Yondaime shook and exploded out of nowhere. Water waves poured everywhere, tainted with the deadly intent of chakra and allowed to wreak havoc and destruction. Smaller, sharper blades sliced and whipped, while large waves crashed around. The chakra drew back a little, and Hinata's eyes glowed. Her eyes suddenly widened, and she gasped before being instantly engulfed by a wave. A strangled cry echoed through the area as the demonic red chakra momentarily faded. Minato squinted her eyes. With his chakra focused, he momentarily split the water and ran through it, causing it to crash back down behind him. When a steady, concentrated stream of flames rushed toward him, he ducked and rushed for Hinata, reaching for her. He turned, narrowly avoiding it. Kisame and Itachi were observing him. The three looked at one another while they waited. Sweden. Daibakufu no Jutsu. The world swirled as the water roared toward him. Genjutsu. Minato gave a quiet snort. He was about to strike back when his stomach began to cramp sharply. He leaned over and coughed, causing blood to flow into his hand. As he stared at it, he suddenly recognized it. The chakra of the Kyuubi caused a wound. Apparently, the demonic chakra was more ruthless and intent on murder than he had thought. You're trapped, Yondaime.kun. He had fought enough battles and wars to know what would happen when he was at a disadvantage, even though he struggled for a short time. He was aware of the consequences of rushing into combat without thinking. Someone would lose their life. Furthermore, he had no intention of allowing any more of his valued people to perish. Regardless, Hinata observed, disinterested. She didn't know what had happened, but she could see what was happening now. She could see damage, devastation, and the Yondaime confronting those two other ninjas, but everything was blurred by a red haze that covered her eyes. Naturally, though, she was unaware of what had transpired. She obviously didn't know what she was doing. She closed her eyes tightly and cried a little in despair. That overwhelming despair was the last thing she recalled. As though to remind her that life had little purpose and that she had little to live for, her life had passed by in a flash. Then. Nothing. Suppressing yet another wave of emotions, Hinata bit her lip. She was unable to think or breathe. Desperately, she was falling. A fool. Oh no. Don't dispute it. What's going on? Listen to me. Then, abruptly, everything around her was dark. Hinata closed her eyes tightly and said a prayer. You can't be heard up there. She opened her eyes. Where had she gone? That voice of cruelty. Where was it? All she could see at the moment was a long, dark, and empty hallway. Yes, exactly. Come with me. Hinata paused, then glanced over her shoulder, briefly catching a glimpse of the devastation occurring outside. So she made a decision. Then she started to move. It was a gate. Her mouth turned slightly down. She had discovered a gate at the end of the hallway. A big, intimidating gate, but a gate nonetheless. Until a dark voice called out to her and a red chakra tendril jutted out from behind the bars. Get closer, child. Her heart stopped in that instant. She was not breathing, she remained silent, she was immobile. Oh my god. Ha, a dark chuckle rasped in the voice. Are you stupid? Yellow eyes sparked momentarily, and there was a flash of red inside. Hinata flinched. She let out a breath. She coughed because her throat was dry. The reason I'm holed up here is because of you. Not worth it. I'm stuck here because of this damnable seal. If I were able to come out. Or you, she yelled softly as his claws made a loud scraping sound against the cage's bars. Kyubi. If I weren't, who would I be? He made a demand. What a dumb girl. You're overly emotional. Too many human characteristics. They weaken you. She pursed her lips. Numerous people had detested her and called her various names. However, no one ever publicly referred to her as weak. Feeble. Already, she was damned. An outcast already. An oddball. But after that fight, after witnessing the destruction of her loved ones, she was not going to be weak. Don't be weak, will you? Did you mean to say that? Fearfully, Hinata began to stare at him. How? He growled, I've been a part of you for 12 years. 12 long years of being pampered here. Isn't that why you're referred to as a demon? He chuckled. 12 years, she muttered to herself. Her heart fell instantly. She had this beast inside of her for 12 years, but still. His yellow eyes glared at her, asking, why? She choked, why, did you, for 12 years? He paced uneasily before slamming into the cage once more, luring her in with slender slivers of chakra. That fucking man you call Hokage gave her a mean smile. For your 12 years, you can give him credit. She gazed at him. Should she call him, Anyo, Kyubi? Kyubi.san? Thinking about this at the moment was absurd, and she felt like she was going a little crazy. However, she would have known that no one would have held her accountable if she had given that some thought. Kyubi-san. She bit her lip while her fingers twisted together as he gave her a stern look. Let's talk. I have nothing better to do because of your miserable Hokage. She sighed and looked at the ground with her white eyes. For 12 years, I was, so, she said. Lonely. She raised her head to gaze at the hideous beast. You. He gave a savage laugh. You freak, I'm a demon. Demon. Her mouth twitched gravely. So was I. She felt a sharp pain that pulled at her. The girl collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Her vision became blurry as she turned her head to face the Kyubi once more. A pair of yellow eyes staring at her was the last thing she saw. And then the dark water's depths. Hinata gasped as she was pulled out, her hands and knees accumulating chakra to keep her afloat. Oh my god, no debris was everywhere, sticking out and submerged in the water. The liquid was tainted with bright red, and as the water rippled, dense clouds of crimson twisted around and moved in her direction. Naruto was heaving and trapped on the dry land to the side. His cheeks were wet and his eyes were bloodshot. He insisted on only looking at the ground. Beside him, Sasuke stirred, breathing wildly, and a raspy cough came out of his mouth. Itachi and Kisame stood on the water, utterly uninformed. They looked nonchalantly at the remains of their rampage, slow pulses of chakra glowing at their feet. With Samahata dripping blood, Kisame smiled slowly. Additionally, Minato. She could practically hear the Kyubi laughing at her, and her heart paused for a second. She whimpered in despair as she gazed down at the crimson water, sickened. His body was covered in ragged cuts that were dripping blood. He was holding his arm clumsily, wrapped in a sloppy, ripped piece of cloth. His blonde hair, which hung in his face and stuck up haphazardly around his head, was muddy, wet, and matted down with blood and dirt. His face was pale, bruised and scratched, and his lips were stretched in a painful grimace. Once surveying them all with experience and calm, bright blue eyes flickered around in resignation, half-closed, dull, and traumatized. Prior to touching her, Minato stood in the shallow water as something ignited. He had obviously fought. Kisame was not unhurt, and Itachi was glaring at the man with a tense apprehension, as though he were facing a foe who had not been simple to defeat and would not be simple to subdue. She shivered as Kisami's smile grew as their gazes turned to her. Naruto hesitated, then slowly raised his head. Her eyes widened, a cerulean blue, glistening with despair and fear. His mouth opened in frantic dismay as he leaned forward, seemingly ready to speak. Nothing was said. Hinata also considered the possibility that she might not have paid attention in the first place because she was too preoccupied with the renegade ninja's intent gaze. She heard three things at the same time: Kisami's low laugh, Kyubi's high-pitched, irritating laugh, and Itachi's intolerable quiet. She saw three things in the next instant: the glow of chakra as it crackled with power, the flash of stained red as a sword was drawn, and droplets of water flying in a delicate arc before they splashed, rippling momentarily, and then vanishing as if they had never been there. She experienced a single sensation in that same moment, as time painfully slowed and the world spun dizzily. Destruction. As a startling pain swept through her body, she let out a cry and fell to her knees. However, as she looked down, her eyes widened and the pain increased. She knew why, but she was unable to move, speak, or do anything else because of it. Determined, Minato stood, his gaze fixed on Kisame and Itachi. He had stopped any assault, but had failed to save himself. Her thoughts froze, and she vaguely heard water splashing around her and a distressed voice yelling in a raspy voice. Naruto knelt next to her, dipped into the water, and gave her a hard shake. He screamed, Hinata, and then, without fully understanding what had happened, his hands fell to his father, pulling him out of the water while he struggled and sobbed. San. He clutched his father's face, rubbing at his injuries and shaking his shoulders. Naruto, Minato grinned softly as he glanced up at his son. I'm sorry. So? He interrupted, coughing, and blood dripped down his cheeks. So sorry. Naruto adamantly ignored the tears streaming down his cheeks and demanded, for what? He turned and socked Sasuke roughly in the arm while yelling at him almost incoherently and sniffing loudly. Hinata's fine, and you're fine and I'm fine and Baka Sasuke is. He interrupted abruptly. Why? Yo, Sasuke. Teme, he spoke in a stifled voice. Get up, Baka. Stop sleeping, lazy. In any other situation, the Hokage would have rolled his eyes and given a gentle snort. He said, he's up, Naruto-kun. As Sasuke rolled groggily to the side, waking up intermittently from nightmares. Oh, oi, he said, sitting up painfully. What? His voice trailed off as he started to take in the devastation all around them and the two ninjas who were still standing on the water, observing them impassively. Itachi let out a quiet sigh. Although he couldn't claim it had been a waste of time, it had undoubtedly been instructive. If the Uchiha had been of the disposition to smile, he would have. A straightforward reconnaissance mission had escalated into a full-fledged conflict between him and his brother, in whom he had consistently been let down without even needing to activate the full Mangekyo, followed by the Yondaime. His words were, "You're a fool, nothing, you still understand nothing." Even though the Yondaime were the target of the words, Sasuke stiffened as the voice he had heard as a child floated in their direction. What we came here for was not the girl. Knowing where his partner was heading, Kisame grinned. With a sigh of mocking gusto, he said, what we came for was information. Had you simply ignored us? The water where they had stood rippled peacefully before settling as the two walked away, letting their words linger. Then the rain started to fall. It was the rain of the skies, the tears of the gods, and the manifestation of everything they couldn't express. It drizzled slowly, gently, almost as if to comfort them, before turning back and hammering at them, numbing, mocking, and hurting. From afar, from the agonizing quiet that hinted at nothing, a final word tightened the agony and clutched at the hurt, clinging and reverberating across the clearing, resonating well above the raindrops. Your death was a meaningless one. Meaningless? Minato laughed quietly while coughing, his bright yellow hair standing out against the mud all around them. He sighed, meaningless. Faye. And Naruto, Sasuke, Hinata. Her clothes were muddy and wet from the rain when she heaved and fell. The regret and the sins of the past were erased. They were no longer significant. Although the rain was supposed to purify and revitalize her, it instead soaked her, leaving her with damp clothes and a heavy heart. Minato remarked, meaningless. That word means nothing. Remember, if you leave this world with no regrets, then no death is meaningless. Sasuke didn't say anything. No regrets. He would have to do that from now on. He was tired of seeing people die in front of him and tired of that man constantly upending his life. He felt a tinge of sympathy and sadness as he looked down at the man who had saved both him and their village. Stopping while you were ahead was not a sign of weakness. Hinata cried quietly. Everything was going terribly wrong. This is not how it was intended to be. How could she? Weep, scream, battle. She had no regrets. She had never been one to scream, and she was already crying. Then she was limited to fighting? Fight the way she would and the way he had. Coughing, crying, protesting, and rocking, Naruto clung frantically to his father. To steady his head, one hand reached up and grabbed his yellow hair, which resembled his father's. He had only known San his entire life. Many people couldn't see past the blonde hair and brilliant blue eyes that were so similar to his father's because his mother had passed away a long time ago. And now, fall, rain, to comfort us and conceal our tears. Fall, rain. before reality is illuminated by the rising of the morning. Rain was falling. This was no typical day. It was a clear, if not sunny, but at least not dark morning. It should have been a typical day by all accounts. The return of his team and the accomplishment of another mission. However, it was never a typical day. Not for Kakashi Hitaki. I'm the final one. The great Yondaimi's name was swiftly carved into the memorial stone by the village, making it permanently inscribed. It was visible to all, no bigger than any other name, and in a few years, it had no greater significance than the others. The Hokage monument was all that remained of Minato before the Hokage name was soon to be passed down to another. With his hands stuffed into his black pants pockets, Kakashi stood before the memorial stone. Today, the whole village was covered in black, shrouded in the gloomy sadness of losing their greatest hero. Yeah, I know, I'm late. He was saying this without really knowing who he was speaking to. He never was. Sorry, I'll be on time tomorrow. He always came up with an excuse, even if no one was around to hear it. There was a special on instant ramen today. A new flavor. He then discussed pointless topics for no other reason. But if this new flavor is popular enough, then they'll stop selling the old one. My usual one. He grinned bitterly. I think I'll miss it. Kakashi let out a quiet sigh. I should have expected this, shouldn't I have? Everything changing, with my luck. As soon as I start to like this new flavor, they'll change it again. He was referring to ramen to anybody else. He was discussing life with those who were listening. He turned and started to leave, heading for the funeral. As usual, they would call him late. However, nobody would be aware that he was the first to start crying. The funeral for the fourth Hokage, who lost his life in battle, will begin now. The distant echo of the Yondaimi's power echoed in the wind, which blew a melancholy tune. The sky was painted a bleak gray, and the sun cast faint shadows throughout the town as it dimly lit the day. The flag swayed gently as it was lowered to half-mast. Black, clad figures surrounded the tribute, their faces twisted in a mixture of anguish and grief. Naruto stood in the front, grieving for himself. He had been granted special treatment at the funeral because he was the Yondaimi's son. He appeared to be crying to those who watched him. He seemed to be dying to those who were thinking about him. Among the others, the Sandame stood as a figure of strength and poise. Lazy rings of smoke drifted away in front of him as he sighed. There was a slight tinge of resignation as he observed the villagers making their way to the tribute. Outliving so many people and witnessing their growth and eventual demise had a numbing effect. In actuality, he was too old for this. A photograph of the Yondaimi sitting atop the tribute, grinning unwaveringly, proud, or possibly sly, was displayed. The legendary ninja had never fully lost the youthfulness and sense of humor that had made him so popular. His eyes were blue with vitality, strength, and the vitality of youth and success. It stood in stark contrast to a boy's dejected eyes after losing everything. Kid. With tears in his eyes, Naruto bit his lip. That voice, ever since he was a child, he couldn't recall a moment when that guy wasn't there, either in his loud and foolish voice, his stupid big white hair, or the stupid books he had lying around the house. Jiraiya. Sama. Sanin, the Great, scowled. He had no recollection of the child ever addressing him by name, much less, Sama. You came to see him, right? Naruto stammered, closing his eyes and speaking in a deliberately neutral tone. Go already. Jiraiya took a small step back and went to the tribute, as though he were telling his perverted sensei that he had once again mastered a jutsu, or gotten the girl. Minato's picture smiled up at him. Jiraiya placed a white flower down and said, yeah, I know, I was supposed to go first, right, Minato? The man with white hair nearly burst out laughing as he said, but you were always the reckless one, the brave one. The one who would give anything for the people he loved. It's a surprise I'm not in your place, considering all the times I had to chase after you and save your behind. A vision of him, years younger, with Minato, exactly as he always had, flashed through his mind. As usual, they were fighting. Minato was showcasing herself once more, and Jiraiya was boasting and exaggerating once more. Minato was graduating, growing into so much, and realizing her innate potential. Minato was descending, heading for a life he had never fully imagined, involving a woman he had never met but who fulfilled every desire he had ever had. In addition to being proud and worn out, Minato was smiling and bringing a new life into the world with his father's exact eye color. Minato held a baby with moon-like eyes and was covered in blood, pain, and uncertainty. And Minato was back here. That never-ending smile is permanently etched in Konoha's memory, trapped inside a photograph. See you, Minato. In a train of black and innocence, the genins came toward the tribute. They placed the flowers down one after the other while thinking about the Yondaime Hokage. He has always been an excellent leader. I aspire to be like him. He is strong and determined. His death wasn't in vain. He bequeathed to us something significant, something to treasure. I apologize. Hinata placed the flower down gently. This is not what I intended to occur. I swear I'll do better, for all that you left us. For all that you gave your life for. Sasuke set the flower aside. I'll never forget what you gave your life for. Nothing is going to change. Aside from us. Unwilling to give up the flower, Naruto swallowed painfully while tinkering with it. Now, nothing will ever be the same again. Were you pleased with me? Was there anything I should be proud of? When I see you again? I'll bring you something that is worthy of the sacrifice you made for us. This was no typical day. The sun was descending and moving in the direction of the horizon. Naruto was lying on the Hokage mansion's roof. Jiraiya ascended and stood directly behind him. Didn't think I'd find you here, he gave a shrug. You should be inside, kid, he gave a headshake. With one hand digging at his shoulder, Jiraiya snorted and pulled him up. Jiraiya snorted in response to Naruto's nod, saying, Cry, kid. You're a genin, right? You're not a ninja yet. You're a kid whose dad is dead. Cry. Yell. Scream. But stop pretending it's okay. After staring at him, Naruto shook and his eyes began to well up with tears. He buried his face in the heavy jacket and hurled himself at Jiraiya, sobbing incoherently. His mind drifted through distant memories of his early years, but the tears came more quickly each time he recalled a flash of yellow hair that wasn't his own. Okay, kid, you can stop crying now. Naruto was a little unsteady as he sat down after Jiraiya shoved him away. So what are you going to do now? The boy with the blonde hair wrinkled his lips. He turned to face the Hokage monument, where the massive stone statues were framed by the sun. When he saw the fractured fourth Hokage, he winced and quickly averted his gaze. I'm going. He took a deep breath and smiled broadly, tears streaming down his cheeks as he spoke. I'm going to be Hokage. Jiraiya gave a nod. He assumed it made sense. The child wasn't terrible, but he wasn't exactly a genius. Jiraiya abruptly snorted and pushed Naruto, saying, That's what your dad told me, 25 years ago. A scrawny kid like you, Hokage, keep dreaming. Naruto gave him a wide-eyed stare before turning back to face the sky and Konoha's everlasting guardians. I will. Furthermore, there was no rain. This is a slight dilemma. Just slightly. Stop joking, this is serious. Who knows what might happen? Nothing, unfortunately. Why? Nothing's going to happen to them. I just don't. And how are you all? You're here. Finally, you're late. I was merely. We were deciding what we would do about them, what might happen to them. Guy struck his trademark pose and gave them a radiant smile. With my team there, you need not fear that anything happened to yours. Not with the superior guidance of my youthful students. Kurenai sighed and gave the green-clad Junin a doubtful glance. I suppose there's nothing we can do about it. We're needed by the Hoka. She interrupted, voice muffled, we're needed. She and Asuma looked at Kakashi, who was devotedly focusing on his orange book and ignoring the conversation. Asuma sighed loudly and released a stream of smoke. Let's go then. Kurenai. Sensei, do we have to? Junin, who had dark hair, looked at her team. Shino stood beside them, the epitome of poise, while Sakura struck Kiba for whining. Sakura assertively remarked, I'm sure it's very important. Kiba.kun, her glance at her sensei was uncertain. Kurenai. Sensei wouldn't leave us for something not important, she said. The pink-haired girl prodded Kiba once more, saying, but it's strange, isn't it? To have 4 Junins sent on one mission, all with teams, and then putting us together to train, some people I wouldn't trust without supervision. Kiba slapped Sakura with a frown. You just want to see Sasuke.kun, don't you? Sakura gave a squeal of outrage. Just because. Sakura muttered about noisy teammates while biting her lip and scuffing the floor. Calmly, Shino turned to Kiba and said, it would be wise to not anger her now. Kurenai started praying. Haha. And now I'll finally get to see some people other than these two. Asuma gave a languid nod. The fact that Ino was presently bouncing around with joy at being able to see Sasuke.kun and Forehead Girl was what he had anticipated. Shikamaru scowled while holding his head up with his hand. Can't we just have the day off? Asuma responded with a laugh. Use your head, Shikamaru. He continued without fully understanding the irony of what he was saying. A mission that requires 4 junins is going to take longer than a day. Shoji crunched another potato chip in his mouth after nodding. His words were, "It'll be fun, seeing everyone again after graduating. And realizing how much each of us has changed. Training?" In response to Hinata's shy inquiry, Kakashi nodded without saying anything. Everyone on his team was silent in one way or another as they stared at him. Naruto scratched the floor, a slight sour expression on his face. "Training? Do we really need to do it with them?" Hinata lowered her head slightly and gave him a quick glance. The idea of training with all of his former academy friends again would have made Naruto jump and scream once, she thought. She was aware that he wasn't thinking about laughing with people or lolling around right now. Sasuke was a little curious. There was always that other genin team that had graduated the year before them, but he didn't think many of his graduating class would be interested in him. He nearly became intrigued, nearly. "Guy. Sensei, I shall persevere to train without your everlasting support guiding my path, and I promise to. If I was really mean, enlighten those unfortunate souls who do not know you with the powerful message that you have passed on to me." Neji looked at Tenten, who was idly spinning a kunai around her finger, and hissed softly in frustration. "Guy. Sensei," says Tenten. "Are you really going to let Lee loose among them? Are you really leaving us to train with a bunch of random genin from another graduating class?" "But Tenten, my dear," the green-clad Junin said, turning to face her with a sparkle in his eyes. And immediately launched into yet another sermon about the beauty that radiated from his cherished students and the vigor of youth. The brown-haired girl squinted, wrinkled her nose, and hurled the kunai at a target nearby, hitting it with deadly precision. The day was going to be long. Now the rain that had not yet fallen was falling, drizzling in the fog of the early morning and covering the village with a damp, gray shadow. Hinata scowled as she looked out her window in despair. 3 other genin teams were to meet them today at Training Ground 10, the biggest and most adaptable of them. The village had been somewhat disorganized since the funeral, lacking a ninja and an official leader. Thus, it was up to individuals like Kakashi, sensei to finish the missions. This is how she ended up with 11 other genin standing awkwardly facing one another around a sizable training area. "So, our senseis were all sent on a mission, yeah. And they decided that we should train together. Apparently." With a sad, bored look on his face, Shikamaru rubbed his head. He sighed, troublesome." Ino slapped him across the arm and said, "Don't be like that." A sugary smile melted across her face as she turned. "Sasuke.kun. Don't wo.re. I'm not bothered by being here." Hinata turned slightly away and bit her lip. Few people were unaware of Ino and Sakura's obsession with her teammate, but she was also aware of Sasuke's strong distaste for their fervent devotion. "I see little use of us being here." A white-eyed boy with a stern face crossed his arms. "Although, as your elders, we must assume leadership." Naruto frowned and squinted. When he tensed up and refused to respond, Naruto charged forward, asking, "Nay, are you Hinata's brother or something? 'Cause you have the same eyes. And, I don't know about you, but I don't see too many white eyes." Hinata was grabbed by a perky brunette with twin buns. "You're right. Hey, Neji, you never told us you had a sister." Flushed, Hinata shook her hand feebly, releasing it from the girl's grasp. "Gee. Gomen, I'm sorry, I don't have a brother." The other girl said, "Yeah," with a laugh. "Neji would make a pretty terrible brother." Oh, no, I didn't mean. I'm Tenten, by the way. And this stick in the mud is Neji. You're Hinata, then, right?" Knowing it was merely polite, Hinata nodded and opened her mouth to speak when a green blur hurried by. The poor girl stumbled back, bowing reluctantly. "I am Rock Lee, the beautiful green beast of Konoha. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance." When the odd boy leaned closer and examined her intently with his beady eyes, Hinata retreated from his statement. "Ah, you must be kin to my teammate. You have the same eyes." Tenten pushed him away and gave Hinata an apologetic smile, saying, "No duh, Lee. Sorry about that. Lee gets a little overexcited about stuff." With a mocking snort, Neji turned away, 20 laps. When Lee screamed, he started running, but the other genins hesitated unsurely. When Neji turned to face them, Sakura looked around and said, What? You mean all of us?" Her eyes were piercing. When Hinata realized that this was what it was like to face the Byakugan, even if he didn't have it, even if it wasn't activated, she nearly backed away. A vein throbbed in the corner of his eye as he said, "We were sent here to train, and you will do as I tell you. Now, 20 laps. Pissed. Hi.na. Sakura and Ino seized her arms and pulled her to the training field's edge. Sakura.san. Ino.san. What? Hey, you're on Sasuke. Kun's team, They bellowed before she could respond. So, what does he like? What does he do? Who does he talk about? No one, I suppose, Sakura groaned and said, no, and I was so looking forward to this training session. Ino took a whiff. Well, you know, he's probably just too embarrassed to talk about me. He probably wants to keep me close to himself. Sakura leered at the blonde girl, her lips turning and her green eyes flashing. Yeah, right. With her hands clasped together, she turned to Hinata and said, he must have said my name before. Don't worry about offending Ino.pig or anything else. Hinata shrugged, helpless. What should she have done? Tell a lie? Give them opulent, dishonestly laced words of praise? Now, hissed whispers rose to angry squeals as Ino and Sakura argued. With hesitation, almost fearful to speak, Hinata interrupted. Anyo, maybe. Sakura and Ino rounded on her, their predatory gazes shining in their eyes. Yi.es, Hinata-chan. Hinata squeaked as she realized that in order to safely escape this situation, she would need to be the most cunning prey ever. The words, well, I could, put in a good word for you, nearly made her turn away. She was practically powerless to deal with the two girls at the moment because they had never given her much attention at the academy. She quickly left as the two girls yelled for her to remember to speak to Sasuke.kun. Something brushed against Hinata's leg as she quietly walked back to join the others in training. She looked down and saw a small white puppy, his eyes wide with unquenchable curiosity as he trotted around her leg, barked, and whined softly. His lips stretched, revealing sharp canine teeth, and his pink tongue lolled, partially protruding from his mouth. Leaning down to caress his white fur, she grinned. She withdrew her hand and stared at him with frightened, almost hopeful eyes as he blew out a gust of wind and waggled his tail. Hinata slowly reached down once more and gave him a quick scratch behind the ears. She chuckled as she caressed his fur once more, stroking the thick, opulent coat of a cherished dog with her fingers. Yo, Akamaru. A boy wearing a long beige coat and dark sunglasses ran up, followed much more subtly by another boy. Hey, Akamaru. Don't go nosing around other people. The boy, who looked up and looked remarkably like his dog, smiled at her. He pointed to the boy behind him and said, I'm Kiba. This is Shino. Hey, you're Hinata, right? Oh no, all of today's interactions appeared to have begun in this manner. Yes, she replied. After all, she couldn't really pretend to be someone else. Good. Kiba turned to face the bushes where Sakura and Ino were still arguing loudly, though no one seemed to be paying much attention. Abruptly, he seized her and pulled her across the training field, in the opposite direction. Hinata whimpered and grudgingly followed, unwilling to object. With a slight sigh, she nodded and said, O.K, Hinata-chan, right? Have you talked to Sakura yet? She gave him a startled look before averting her eyes. How did you know? He said, I'll take that as a yes, utterly disregarding her query. While playing absently with Akamaru's fur, Kiba muttered to himself, you're on a team with Uchiha, right? Yeah, of course you are. Shino moved forward, his gaze fixed on Hinata, though it was difficult to see her through those sunglasses. Hinata.san, as Sakura's teammate and friend, we have a certain responsibility to watch out for her. A responsibility she'd kill us for if she knew. And as such, we'd like to keep her from associating with the wrong people. But Hinata said, glancing between the two. Kiba shrugged and appeared to be about to continue when a loud voice interrupted, saying, Sasuke's not right for her. Naruto squinted and poked Kiba in the head, saying, Hinata-chan, what are you doing? With Kiba? Baka here. Hey, you shouldn't be calling me that, Naruto. In response, Naruto turned up his nose and sniffed. I don't associate with rabid dogs. Now, he said, snatching Hinata's arm and pushing her away. As Naruto and Kiba faced one another, glaring with a renewed rivalry, she thought sadly, not again. What were you doing with Hinata? What's it to you? I worry about anyone that talks to you. Hey. They turned to see the other genins staring at them when a bored voice interrupted. Oi. We're supposed to be training. If you want to fight, then spar. Sakura remarked, Ino.pig doesn't stand a chance against me, as the two girls inched their way to the front of the group. With a frown and a sharp reply, Ino started a vicious argument in which both girls claimed to be far better than the other. Lee cried out in triumph. The beauty of their infallible determination and strength shines like. Shut up, Lee. Then, Shikamaru said, appearing almost intrigued by this development. Kiba versus Naruto and Sakura versus Ino. I can beat you any day. Are you sure this is a good idea? Such beauty. This is a waste of time. You scared? You scared to face me? You'll never have him, not with me around. Hinata sighed in despair and turned to face the world. These were all the people she hoped to know and love in the future, as well as the people she loved the most. She gave a small smile and followed them as they drifted toward the open training field. Stretching and lingering, Sasuke eased himself onto the tree's branch. A part of him was glad that they were taking a break from training, while the other part of him insisted on going on. After 3 days of training together, they had finally managed to establish some sort of harmony, though it had taken some time. After some time, they were finally collaborating on their training. Warm-ups, weapons, taijutsu, chakra, etc. had been pretty uneventful today. Of course, nothing compared to that first day, when they had been in utter chaos. After leaving the academy, everyone had divided into their own genin teams and had been careless with their training, so they hadn't really known one another. It had been a chaotic day, but nothing noteworthy had come of those two spars. It had been an interesting fight between the blonde and the pink-haired girl. Was he supposed to remember their names? Something about pigs and flowers? Somewhere in the middle, it had evolved into something more than a friendly spar between friends. He wasn't a very good judge of friendship, but that's what they seemed to be. By the end, both of them were exhausted and sore, but they were grinning as they sat next to one another, drowsily resting the other on their head, paw, weak. The altercation between the dog and the dobi had been strange. To be honest, that was the only way to characterize it. Although it had begun fairly normally, by the end they were all in complete shock and somewhat annoyed with Naruto. A fart. How do you win with a fart? Being the understanding person that she was, Hinata approached him and, without tactfully reminding him that he had been losing badly for the majority of the fight, congratulated him and said that she had always believed in him. Sasuke-kun. Get down here. You think you're so much better that you can just skip out on training? Oi, Uchiha. Get your lazy butt out of that tree. We must all strive for a level of perfection that is. Sasuke. You really should come down now, he smirked as he jumped down lightly in front of them after hefting himself off the branch. Behind him, a soft breeze tousled his hair and the leaves rustled softly. A dozen fangirls let out a squeal. The perfect combination of training and genes had left his lips twisted upwards, creating an air of haughty elegance. 12 fangirls passed out. Who do you think you're trying to impress? Teme. After giving him a fierce look, Naruto spun around and grabbed hold of Hinata. Let's go. Let's go, Lee. Show me that move again. Don't be so stupid, Kiba. Hinata. Chan, spar with me. Before leaving with Naruto, Hinata gave Sasuke one last, regretful smile. Hinata inhaled deeply and twisted her fingers. The others were off doing something else, loudly conferring and talking. The only person she had avoided for the majority of the training session was the only one who was still available to assist her. Even without their awkward beginning, most people would have avoided him, so it wasn't like she did it on purpose. He just gave off the vibe that he was superior to them, that he was aware of it, and that you're not worth talking to if you don't face the facts. To be honest, it was somewhat similar to Sasuke's. Anyo, en Neji-san, when the white-eyed boy turned to face her, he instantly turned his eyes, which, she had to admit, looked a lot like hers, away from her. Hinata had been able to stay away from him for the last 4 or 5 days without much difficulty. He wasn't exactly the most endearing person she knew, the type of person who naturally drew others to him, and Neji hadn't exactly been actively looking for her. They had agreed to disregard one another and carry on with their training independently after that terrible introduction on the first day. Considering that there were 10 other people present, each of whom stood out considerably more than they did separately, it hadn't been particularly difficult. However, Hinata had taken the first step in his direction because they had essentially been thrown together. Train by yourself. Hinata pulled away and bit her lip, blinking. He had blatantly rejected her silent plea to train without even hearing her. She shifted uneasily and turned her head away when she was rebuffed. From the other side of the training field, Naruto was frowning and staring at them. Despite what they said about him, Naruto was still a step above an idiot, and it took a fool to miss that Neji had insulted and disregarded Hinata. Of course, he was getting closer every day. Hey, it's not very nice to just ignore someone. Hinata. Chan wouldn't do that to anyone, so. Hinata squeezed her eyes shut and whimpered in embarrassment. The fact that Neji disregarded her when she tried to reach him was awful enough, but Naruto approaching and defending her. She exhaled and squared her shoulders. Naruto-kun, I don't think that, she said. I think that maybe Naruto, she said, grinning slightly as she turned to face him. I think that I'll deal with this. After briefly furrowing his brow, he gave her a thumbs up and smiled. That's the spirit. Neji shook his head and looked at them coolly. The idea that he should be brother to another idiot was absurd. Ignoring the fact that he was already a teammate and the pupil of another fool. He asked in a level, emotionless voice, is there a point to this conversation? Hinata gave him a quick glance and a small nod. Neji-san, you said that we were here to train, S.So, since everyone else is busy, thought that you could, perhaps. For a ninja to stutter is highly unbecoming. With that sort of demeanor, you expect to survive in this profession? She scowled and averted her gaze. She was aware that her meekness was awful. She still stammered, and she had never been the most lively of people. Every time those thoughts crossed her mind during her time at the academy, she would remind herself that ninjas were made by their skills, not their personalities. No ninja could talk his way out of death. She also reminded herself that she would undoubtedly get stronger, faster, and better with training. Neji used the moment to thoroughly examine the girl before him as Hinata turned her head away. This was Hinata, the Hinata he had heard about previously, the Hinata who shared his eyes, the only one who still had them. Still, he was aware that he couldn't bring himself to do or say anything when he saw her. He had started to get to know her and comprehend her over the last few days. He was aware of her shyness, her extreme meekness, and the fact that she wasn't particularly strong. She was unpopular, lacked a strong personality, and wasn't particularly attractive. Although they greeted her and knew her, people's gazes eventually passed over her. Ultimately, the fact that he had discovered all of this about a person he had hardly spoken to was a remarkable testament to his ability to observe. He intended to leave it that way and lead a happy life without having to get to know Hinata. His schemes seemed to have been foiled. I will spar with you, if that is what you want. Hinata took a deep breath. She had already been creating a training schedule for the day that was to be completed individually, so she hadn't really expected him to accept. They had both waited in silence before Neji initiated contact, and she hadn't even asked him more than once. However, I urge you to not expect much of it, you are no match for me. Maybe he was more direct than she thought. Now, come. There is no need to stall, unless you are afraid. The statement, Anyo, Neji-san, caught her off guard. More than anything, she had hoped to train with someone, just training, not fighting. She was not prepared to fight. He stated bluntly and in a daze, a battle waits for no ninja, and Hinata grudgingly followed him. They took up their battle positions as they came to an open clearing. When Hinata saw his stance, a distinctive one that she had assumed was exclusive to her, a deep shudder of surprise passed through her. She bit her lip and waited. If her suspicions were correct, he should have activated. Neji charged at her, slashing quickly and mercilessly. Hinata yelled, ducked, and retaliated reflexively, her movements slow by contrast. He fought her with rehearsed movements and old reflexes. Not daring to attack, Hinata stepped around him, matching his fighting style. She might take a chance on getting hurt too. To observe. Although he was fighting, he wasn't really fighting her. Instead of just charging in and performing a few fancy moves, a person who truly understood how to fight would assess his opponent and modify his fighting style to fit the situation. He had something to conceal. She flinched and staggered back as he threw a burst of chakra at her. His breath caught as he asked, "Why do you not fight?" Neji takes a deep breath and turns his head away, his black hair pulled back in a thick ponytail. His eyes have changed by the time he looks up again. She was the focus of Neji's gaze. Recognizable eyes. She recognized the eyes. She was closely related to eyes that she had never seen. Her own eyes were reflected back at her. Eyes bright and wide, the little Hinata blinked. Anyo, Uruka. Sensei, W. What's an Oni? Chan. Uruka squatted down beside her after silently staring at her. Hinata. Chan. Why do you ask? She instantly lowered her face to the floor while her fingers gripped one another. W. Well, oh. On the street, th. There was a girl and a boy and she said, she circa called him Oni. Chan, and, a dot and they s. Seemed so happy. Uruka thought he heard her sniffle as her voice faltered a little on the happy part. Oni. Chan means older brother, you know that Hinata. Hi, but Uruka. Sensei, WH. What is an oni? Chan. Hinata gazed at Neji, and his intense, unblinking eyes returned the gaze. Neji-san, do you know what an oni? Chan is? His mouth curled in skepticism. His words were, an older brother. Yes, Hinata uttered slowly, but do you know what an oni? Chan is? Uruka gave a slow nod. He was aware that Hinata was fully aware of oni. Chan's meaning. An oni, Chan, is someone who loves you and cares for you. He's someone who teases you mercilessly but despises anyone else who does the same. An oni, Chan, is the earth surrounding your roots. He is your blood, your brother, your protector. To call someone or be called oni, Chan, is one of the greatest responsibilities you can have. Byakugan. As the twin Byakugans gazed at one another, Hinata stepped closer to Neji and breathed slowly and deliberately. He appeared to be struggling with his inner self as he faltered. Neji tensed when a voice whispered behind them, "Isn't Neji an orphan?" His eyes hardened and his lips set, shutting off. He turned away from her in a single motion. Hinata's chest tightened as she inhaled. He faced her with his back to a single, nearly impenetrable wall. It seemed as though she had finally struggled through a dense vine forest, as though she had hacked away at the last branch while sunlight streamed into her face, only to be met by a tower devoid of windows or doors and a prisoner who refused to be rescued. She wasn't much of a rescuer, to be honest. In spite of everything, a real knight or hero would have charged forward and extended their hand. He would have been challenged to look at her, to look into her eyes, by a true ninja. However, she didn't. As Neji left, Hinata saw the others disperse and start chatting among themselves. But she was aware now. She was aware that her past involved more than just herself. She was aware that he likely knew more about her than she did. Furthermore, a real ninja never gives up. Hinata watched him, and even as his eyes vanished, hers remained fixed. Forgetting was so simple. Naruto gazed out at the night's dark hues. He had sat here as the sun went down not so long ago, grieving uncontrollably over the one thing that no one could stop. However, it had been so simple to ignore and forget that, to laugh and spar and train with people who hadn't yet gone through that kind of dejection. However, he had also seen Hinata with Neji, who, if they both accepted their blood, could be her own. He didn't really know anything about it. He only knew that those eyes conveyed a message that both wielders were obstinate individuals who could regain everything they had lost with a single effort. Less than 3 months had passed since his academy graduation. During that period, he lost the people he loved the most and found the people he trusted the most. He had discovered friends, a teacher, and a brother. He would worry about that tomorrow even though he had no idea what would occur. Naruto took a deep breath, got to his feet, and shouted at the moon and stars in the night. He shared with them his nightmares, desires, and dreams. He told them that he was eager to see what fate had in store for him but that he wasn't going to play along with her. He related a tale of a girl, a boy, and another boy, along with the people they had encountered, the locations they had visited, and the rapidly approaching future. The stars nodded, the moon grinned, the village slept, and time passed after he told them this. Honestly, the blonde woman gave her assistant a close look and said, "Yes, honestly. Call her in, it's the best thing we can do for her." With a sigh, the brunette moved. She walked out of the room, leaving the blonde alone, saying, "I'll send someone for her then." With a heavy sigh, she clasped her hands together. Tsunade rubbed her forehead slowly. She had only been Hokage for a few weeks after being persuaded to return to Konoha by that brat of a child. Minato's legacy and the most driven child she had ever seen was Naruto. Coming to Konoha to see how he would do had been almost enjoyable. However, Tsunade shook her head and pursed her lips. The issue was that someone else, who shared his spirit, was subjected to far more oppression and crushing than he was. Hokage. Sama. Tsunade looked up with a faint smile. "Hinata-chan, come in." The girl with the dark hair pushed her way slowly into the room and took a seat in the chair in front of her desk. "Hinata, I have to ask you something." "Why?" "Yes, Hokage. Sama. Do you love this village?" Hinata got going. She had anticipated a mission, or perhaps a request to improve and train more. Not the touchy-feely, psychological. "Do you love this village?" Her feelings had never been that important to anyone. "Yes, I do love this village." Tsunade scowled and wanted to shake the girl, who was averting her eyes entirely. She didn't come across someone who could truly look her in the eye and express their feelings honestly very often. Hinata seemed to be no different. "No, Hinata. You love this village. You would fight for it and you would perish for it. You would call it home." But you do not love it. Hinata's heart lurched. She had no idea what to say or do, where this was going, whether she loved this village, whether Konoha had done anything extraordinary for her, and she had never harbored the slightest animosity toward it. You, Naruto, and Sasuke have all been observed by me. You cannot look at me and claim to love Konoha, with the possible exception of Naruto. Additionally, I apologize because Konoha is unworthy of your affection. After taking a deep breath, Tsunade sat back in her chair, crossed her arms, and gave Hinata a thorough evaluation. Hinata shifted uneasily and pressed her fingers together. All of her old behaviors were rapidly returning in front of this formidable woman. Hinata, you deserve better than this village. In an attempt to find the right words, Tsunade drummed her fingers. So, I want to give you more. What are your thoughts on training, beyond the village? Hinata's head snapped up. Training? What? Did she mean leaving behind her team, Team 7? Leaving behind Naruto, Sasuke, and Kakashi? Sensei. And when she said training, Hinata had a sudden, sharp vision that left her gasping for air. It was an image of herself as an older, wiser, stronger, and more proud woman, proud of all that she had achieved. Beyond the village. Come in, Hazuki. Hinata turned slightly as the door was pushed in and a figure entered after Tsunade's voice broke her silence. The first thing she saw was the careless smile of someone who had been on edge all her life and had no idea how to stop. Her eyes were the second thing she saw, pristine white eyes. Shizune softly closed the door behind Hinata as she backed away down the corridor. Tsunade. Sama, the young woman shifted inside. What did she say? What can she say? Tsunade asked, looking out the window toward the horizon, but she remained silent. I am going to give her a week. She'll come up with a better idea by then if she can. Anyo, this probably isn't the best time, but what about? I understand. I considered that, and doing the same was the only thing that came to mind. Shizune's mouth curled. But wouldn't that be a little odd? To send them both off? The Hokage sighed and shook her head, but seriously, you tell me what we should do, Tsunade said, laughing briefly. They didn't choose me for my brains, obviously. He must be removed from this village. Naruto needs to leave this location. Take a look at him. Shizune approached and they both glanced down at the training fields nearby, where the Yondaime's sun was clearly visible as a splotch of bright orange. Even at this early hour, the weight of the previous few weeks was evident. Just take a look at him. If he remains here any longer, he will commit suicide. With her hands folded and a Hokage expression already visible on her face, Jiraiya stood before Tsunade. What made you give me a call back? After a brief period of silence, Tsunade looked out the window. That child, Naruto, is the one who accompanied you to bring me back. Is he not Minato's son? Jiraiya folded his arms and nodded. She was obviously building to something, and it wasn't as though that information was secret. You know, I considered returning. Since news spreads quickly, the messengers were able to find me in time. I had the opportunity to attend his funeral. I know the child knows me. I returned a couple of times to visit Minato and the village, but he's hurting, Jiraiya. Every day, since we came back, I see him outside my window, and I see him training, on his own, all day. Alone. Sasuke's up in the mountains every day, learning some advanced technique from Kakashi now that he's mastered the Sharingan. And Hinata. Oh, Kami, Hinata. However, she already had to deal with Hinata. After sending the message and receiving a response, their only option was to wait. However, they were unable to wait for Naruto. Oi, kid, what are you doing here? Naruto turned and gave a grudging smile. Arrow. Sennin. What are you doing here? Jiraiya folded his arms and shrugged. He added with a smug smile. I guess she just couldn't keep away from me. Tsunade wanted me back in the village. Muttering to himself, Baka, Naruto returned to his training, resolutely hurling another shuriken at the target. Leaning against a nearby post, the white-haired man observed. As it soared through the air, the shuriken struck its target with lethal precision, but it was unaffected by another shuriken and landed far to the right. Naruto swore quietly to himself and threw another one, this time avoiding the post entirely and landing pathetically on the ground. Naruto, I want you to train him. Me? Jiraiya almost burst out laughing. Then he stopped. He had known Tsunade for years, longer than either of them would like to acknowledge, and during those years she had been both deadly and serious and drunk and unlucky. Why? The blonde Hokage gave a shrug. Tsunade tilted her head in his direction, her eyes solemn and honest. You had some success with his dad. Like father like son. And, at this time, she said. At this time, who else can I trust? Jiraiya gave her a scowl. Did he really have an option when she said it that way? Even he was aware that at this point, there was nothing more they could do to help Naruto. Naruto, what would you say to becoming cool? Turning to look at him doubtfully, Naruto wrinkled his nose. He parted his lips as though to speak, but changed his mind and turned away once more. No really. I mean, becoming amazing. And you want to know how you did it? No, Jiraiya halted and scowled at the child's harsh tone. I don't want to be like you, Arrow. Sennin. Jiraiya barked briefly, then what would you rather be? Consider this, Naruto. You told me, while gazing at the Hokage monument, that you hoped to become Hokage at some point and that you wanted to be a worthy person who would defend everyone, including Sasuke, Hinata, and everyone else who holds special meaning for you. Come train with me. I'll help you and teach you. Naruto clenched his teeth. He had known that since Arrow Sennin had attempted to gently guide him into it, but he had refused, refusing to be guided by sympathy, pity, or the memory of his father. I don't. So, what do you want? Do you wish to remain in this village and observe as you descend, engulfed and protected by these walls? You know that staying here won't get you anywhere. Before you can overcome any external challenges, you must first conquer yourself. You must defeat your father. Think about it, Naruto. Jiraiya let out a deep sigh and scowled at Tsunade, who paused before letting out a breath. If you can't, or just won't because of some stupid perverted reason, I'll do it. Tsunade paused, squinted at him, folded her arms, and gave a small nod. Good. He had spent days up here, alone, training. Team 7 had all but lost contact with one another. Sasuke leaned over, one hand on his thigh, panting, his eyes glaring at the boulder in front of him, huge craters smoldering with electricity, charged chakra. Though it had taken her some time to track Sasuke up to the mountains, Hinata watched him from the sidelines. Days, even weeks, had passed since they had had a proper conversation. This was not how they could leave it, Sasuke. He tensed up and pivoted, looking at her indifferently, Hinata. As Sasuke waited, Hinata sighed and pressed her lips together, fidgeting and twisting her fingers around one another. Sasuke, she said at last. Do you mind if we had a conversation? Thus, they ended up eating ramen in silence at Ichiraku. How ironic that we're here without Naruto, Sasuke said with a grimace as he forked some noodles into his mouth. Hinata looked at him, thinking that since she had already considered Ichiraku, she might as well offer dinner as a way to make up for taking Sasuke away from his training. However, since they had already arrived, she might as well fulfill her desire. Sasuke, thank you. Hinata had folded her hands in her lap and placed her chopsticks across her bowl of ramen, and her white eyes were serious and serene as she gazed at him, and he looked at her in surprise. Sasuke, ever since we were assigned to a team 3 months ago, I have enjoyed spending time with you and Naruto. I guess the three of us are similar. Each of us is alone in our own way. And Naruto is fortunate, but you and I, she gave him a feeble smile, and he gave her a small nod in understanding. Hinata hopped off her stool lightly and placed a few coins on the table, saying, Together, I think we've found a family, all our own. Oji-san, thank you. The raven-haired boy paused, then followed her, and Hinata smiled as she led him out onto the streets of Konoha. Sasuke slowly followed suit and stood, and Hinata took a step forward before turning to face him. After they had walked in silence, she said, Sasuke, Hokage. Sama called me to her office today. He nodded, suddenly fearing what she would say. A mission? But they hadn't been a proper team lately. Was that what the Hokage had wanted to say? A lecture, perhaps, about teamwork, but I was introduced to someone else by Hokage. Sama. And, Gomen, Sasuke, Hinata said with a somber sigh, biting her lip. I'm invited to train with Tsunade. Sama. He scowled. This nearly formal disbandment of their team was a little depressing, but by no means was it tragic. Tsunade. Sama wants me to leave the village. Hinata shook her head pathetically as Sasuke halted and turned to face her. I know Tsunade. Sama believes this is best for me, and I do want to, but Sasuke, what about? What about Team 7? I haven't said yes yet. He remained silent. All three of them knew they had been amazing together and were happy together, in a way that none of them was now, and they hoped to patch up their broken genin team. Go Hinata, Sasuke said, forcing himself to shrug, do as you please. The uncertainty in his words was reflected in her eyes as she blinked. Sasuke. Hinata. There are a lot of similarities between you and me, but there are also a lot of differences. We are surprisingly different in spite of everything. Despite his many differences from us, Naruto shares a lot of similarities with us. Even though we work as a team, we don't have to spend the rest of our lives beside one another. He gave her a small grin and said, "Go, Hinata. I'll be alright with the Dobi." Hinata pressed her lips together and came close to crying, but she knew that if she did, Sasuke would turn away, looking vaguely disgusted, a little anxious, and a little flustered. Naruto was supposed to run up and greet them loudly any moment now, and he would be grinning as if he hadn't smiled in a long time. And they would be Team 7 once more for a brief instant. Hours had passed since Jiraiya had presented his proposal to Naruto, who sat on his bed with his face buried in his hands. Was it really necessary for him to go? Despite everything, he knew that Sennin was, to a certain extent, a strong ninja who had trained an even stronger one, in his opinion, so there was no question that he would get stronger if he left. Working out with him it would be similar to walking into Sen's shoes. Squeezing his eyes shut, Naruto asked himself if he wanted to be like his father, a powerful leader who could defend those around him, a hero, a figure of strength, and he wanted to be Hokage in order to achieve that. Did he wish to emulate his father, though? The fact that he was exactly like him was awful enough, but he would train with the same instructor, go on the same missions, and ultimately spend the rest of his life in the same manner, right? What would his father say? What would Sasuke or Hinata say? "No, your father will never be you." Sasuke would chuckle and turn his head away. "Only Naruto can be you." Hinata's eyes would know exactly what he meant when she gave him the cutest smile. "You're only going to get better." Because he had asked himself the same question, Minato would smile and ruffle his hair. "You'd do it with me, if you're curious about how you'd go about it." Jiraiya used to point toward the horizon and the gates of Konoha. Everyone seemed to want him gone, so Naruto shook his head and sighed before grinning slightly and gazing out the window at the lowering sun. Who was he to refuse? A long time had passed. The rooms were completely dark, dark to conceal the bloodstains, and the sky was inky black instead of the blood red he remembered. A single candle glowed in the room he stopped in, casting shadows across the floor and across the pictures resting there. Sasuke walked across the cold, hard floors, almost soundlessly in his stocking feet, and a faint smoke drifted behind him as he walked, leaving the faintest hint of incense in the air. It had been years, but it still hadn't been long enough, so Sasuke knelt slowly and cautiously avoided staring at the photos for too long. The only thing he could offer them was silence, so he knelt down in front of them. He offered them training instead of grieving, retribution instead of forgiveness, and silence in place of tears. However, what about his contentment? If he was so full of hate, could he be happy? When had he decided he didn't need happiness? He had been avoiding the light for a while, but now he was afraid of it because... Would he be content at all? Now, could he even be happy, even if he tried, even if he wanted to? Sasuke believed that he had been nearly happy, not that he really knew what happiness was anymore. That he had nearly smiled, that he had nearly had fun, that he had nearly been alive for something other than retribution. He had pondered. Now he realized that thinking was useless. There was no use in contemplating what might have been, what ought to have been, or what had been. You could only take action. And if he had acted sooner, if he had started acting sooner, perhaps he wouldn't be thinking these things now. Would she still be leaving if he had taken action sooner? Perhaps. Perhaps he simply wasn't meant to have all the things that people believe they should have, like friends, family, and a house. Lifting his head, Sasuke gazed at his father and mother through half-closed eyes. It didn't really matter. He could still see their faces every time he closed his eyes, so he might as well. He never used names when he thought of them, or anyone else. Uchiha Fugaku Uchiha Makoto Itachi Uchiha. That day 5 years ago had been the last day of his life, and he would never have it back. With a silent sigh, Sasuke clenched his teeth and extinguished the candle, leaving behind a thin trail of smoke that appeared and vanished in the darkness with equal speed. That night, the moon shone brightly, round and luminous, casting a dreamy aura over the village and enveloping it in a warm glow. Sasuke, however, remained there throughout the night in the dark, recalling all he had done, forgetting what he had discovered, and realizing that nothing would ever be the same. With a sigh, Hinata threw herself onto her bed. Must she leave? Or remain? Is she selfish, or what? Whatever she decided, Hinata would be selfish, and she had never been selfish before, so she bit her lip and messed up her face. If she decides to leave her friends behind in order to pursue her own goals, she will be selfish. Or should she stay and act selfishly by holding on to her friends tightly and constantly bringing them down? What is your top priority? It was in these moments, when she felt so lost and discouraged and confused and helpless, that she needed someone to turn to. Her fingers trembled as she tugged on her hair and remembered. She hiccuped, grasped her head, and sighed long and sorrowfully. Go Hinata. Sasuke had told her to leave, but he was only focusing on her and thinking in accordance with the mindset he had developed for himself. He knew that if he had been him, he would have gone after power right away, and he had not considered his own future but rather hers, choosing for her what he would have wanted. Breathe deeply twice. What do you want to achieve? My dream is to become worthy. With a sorrowful smile, Hinata silently recited the words she had spoken so long ago, before she had truly known Naruto and Sasuke, before she had realized the full depth of her innermost feelings. They all had hopes, they all wished for something, they all knew the cost of dreaming, and they all had dreams. Sasuke and Naruto were also resolved to make the payment. Hinata extended her hand and took the picture frame she had indulged in an unusual way. It was a plain black wooden frame that she had carved 2 words into using a kunai. 7th team. Around a picture of the 3 genin and their sensei, the stylistic letters curled. Naruto, looking as upbeat and carefree as ever. Sasuke, with his half-smirk and calm manner. Kakashi, smiling at the camera with his visible eye closed as his other one would never be. And Hinata, dressed in big, loose-fitting coats, with her head tipped down and her eyes slightly turned up toward the camera. Hinata closed her eyes for a moment, tilted her head at the photo, and then quickly pushed it down and put it back in its proper position. She wasn't really making a decision because of this. As Hinata leaned back on her bed, she exhaled slowly. She had spent the last few months trying to be like Naruto and Sasuke, training, crying, and smiling because they were everything she wanted to be. She now understood, they would never be her. She was not nearly as good as they were. What was she to do, then, if she wanted to be Hyuga Hinata rather than a teammate of Uchiha and Uzumaki? Must she leave? Or remain? Or perhaps she could leave and still have a place to return to in Konoha? And perhaps that would be sufficient even if Sasuke and Naruto were the only ones left. Because they were Team 7, no matter what. There were other members of Team 7 besides Uchiha, Uzumaki, and that other girl. Naruto, Sasuke, and Hinata made up Team 7. Team 7 was a part of her, and she was a part of them. Regardless, Hinata busied herself by doing the dishes. She had always enjoyed doing little busywork projects like that, such as cooking dinner, cleaning the house, and taking care of her plants. It kept her mind off of other, more melancholy thoughts. She was startled by a loud knock on her door, and the wet plate nearly fell out of her hands. Hinata gasped softly, fumbled at it, and quickly put it down. Wiping her hands, she went to the door and unlocked it, but before she could do so, it flung open on its own. Hinata. When she recognized who it was, she stepped back. Naruto. He paused, scraped his toe, pursed his lips, and gave her a slightly unsure smile. Hinata, can I talk to you? Of course, she said, opening the door wider after blinking. I mean, she fell back, hands flying to her face as she began to hurry around the small room, picking up a few stray items and straightening piles of books and scrolls. It's kind of messy, but sit, she trailed off, glancing at Naruto, who was still standing in the doorway, surveying her tiny apartment. Sit up. No matter how modest or simple he was accustomed to the luxury that she could not afford, and Hinata blushed as she recalled that he was the Hokage's son and was accustomed to much grander mansions. He gave her a smile. I like it. Hinata's eyes widened, she bit her lip, and she looked down at him incredulously, a satisfied smile spreading across her face. She should have known. I'll make tea. He was already sitting on her old, beaten couch when she returned and handed him a hot cup, and she sat down lightly next to him. You wanted to tell me what? He sighed after giving her question some thought. Hinata, we've experienced a lot together, haven't we? Me, Sasuke, Baka, and you. However, he put down his cup and rubbed his head, gazing around as though Hinata's apartment's simple whitewashed walls would hold the solution. As he did this, she watched him with a sense of dread, her hands shaking from fear of his words, and finally she put down her cup, if only to avoid dropping it. I'd like to train with Ero. Senin. I think I'll say yes. I'm pretty sure I'll say yes, he said, looking at her with a smile on his face but a look of uncertainty in his eyes, as though he were begging her to confirm that he was making the right choice. However, I wanted to let you know first. Sasuke and you. Hinata sighed, not sure what she had been anticipating, but definitely not that. His predicament, now that she considered it, was a lot like her own. Hinata. Chan, isn't that a good thing? Being able to travel to all those different locations and train one with a great ninja. She gave him a gentle smile and said, yes, Naruto. How could she blame him for making the same choice as herself? She was a lot of things, but she wasn't a hypocrite. She pursed her lips and then uttered, "It's a good thing that Sama asked me the same question." Well, there is a woman named Hazuki-san, Tsunade. Sama. Hokage. Sama claims that she is an excellent ninja, so she wants me to train with her outside of the village as well. After a moment of hesitation, she said, "I'm going to train, and I think you should too." Though he might not have been Sasuke's equal in brilliance or raw power, he possessed a vital element that both she and Sasuke lacked. "I think that you have so much and that, if you try, you can." She paused, uncertain of what to say. For a brief moment, she thought she saw Minato in his blue eyes. That man who had saved them all, and perhaps that was what he had, someone to run and gaze at, someone who had gently and constructively led him. But then, Hinata. We're friends. Correct? Even though it might not seem like much, we have been friends for a few months. Nevertheless, the three of them had each other to aim for ever since their team was formed. Walking around Konoha, eating, they were always eating with Naruto around. Somehow, food got involved in every situation they found themselves in, and Naruto telling him a story about 3 dandelions. Sasuke wasn't really sure how he had ended up in this situation. Alright, so these 3 dandelions grew in the same patch, correct? As a result, the dandelions became close friends and endured many hardships, such as weed killers, hungry rabbits, and thunderstorms. But, hey, they were still together and there. You understand, Sasuke? Baka? Yes, Naruto, the Uchiha said with a weary nod. I understand. Alright. Then a large daffodil appears one day. You have to leave now, she tells 2 of the dandelions. And Naruto was in the middle of telling his story when Sasuke turned suddenly. Hinata already informed me. She's heading out to train. If you continue avoiding the topic, Naruto. Got it, Naruto said, scrunching his nose up at him. Quit avoiding the topic. I understand. Hinata watched them in silence, unsure of how Sasuke would respond and how Naruto would respond to Sasuke. It was difficult enough to figure out her own heart, but even more difficult to figure out those around her. What? So you're also going? With whom? Ero. Sennin. Jiraiya, the author of the book Kakashi. Sensei always has with him. What makes you want to train with him? My dad was trained by him. Fine. Sasuke retreated, unwilling to engage in combat with Naruto at this time, as he was too preoccupied to do so. It ended like this. He reflected on all they had experienced. He was the only member of their team left behind. He reflected on their joint creation. They decided on Naruto and Hinata out of all the people they could have picked. He reflected on the person he had become because of them. Once more, he was by himself. Sasuke turned and started to leave, not wanting to start an emotional altercation, which he had never been good at. There wasn't much time left, so Hinata couldn't let him go that way, so she kept staring after him in a helpless manner. Naruto gave an exaggerated shrug, saying, well, if I tried to talk to him, I'd probably ruin everything. I'm not as good at this stuff as you are you? He tossed his head in Sasuke's general direction. Hurry up. After giving Naruto a final look, Hinata nodded slightly and rushed after Sasuke. Sasuke. Hold on, Sasuke. When she ran up to him, Hinata threw herself into a bow, bending over at the waist, much to Sasuke's surprise. The Uchiha turned back to her and paused. Gomenasai. She was out of his line of sight as he said, apologizing doesn't change anything. I apologize for the moment I misplaced your shuriken. Sasuke halted and gave her a disbelieving blink. Hinata. I apologize for the time you had to start over after I stumbled over the leaf pile you raked. I apologize for the time I offered to buy us ramen, but you had to pay since I was out of money. I apologize for the time I made you and Naruto bentos without realizing you had a taro allergy. Hinata gulped her breath and then gave Sasuke a direct look. However, I don't regret wanting to follow my dreams. Her heart pounded at her outburst, and she breathed heavily. Hinata recoiled as she realized what she had said, her eyes widening in embarrassment. Sasuke, I'm not sorry for wanting to not break up our team, he said, rewarding her with a half smile that was probably the most honest thing he had ever said. Her tremulous smile faded a little as she said, well, I'm not sorry for wanting our team to be stronger. Naruto, I don't think he's sorry for wanting to become a good and proper rival for you. Don't, he said, turning his face toward the horizon, make me feel bad for letting you two go. You had better learn something, anything that Dobi can actually fit into his brain. And you, thank you. He gave her a sly smile and turned to leave. Hinata sighed. She didn't feel the need to chase him this time, and she could return home smiling. She was able to leave the village this time smiling contentedly and with a calm heart. Hinata-san. She turned and found herself staring at someone who was clearly uncomfortable. Neji, I heard. He turned his head slightly away and spoke stiffly, saying, I heard that you were to train outside the village and would be leaving soon. Almost as if he had been coerced into it, his eye twitched slightly. I wish to speak with you. Hinata let out a small sigh and blinked, remembering that day on which they were training together. Neji-san. He said, I bear no ill will towards you. Hinata-san. His expression was emotionless and rigid, but she could see the worry in his eyes, which she was familiar with. There are a lot of things we need to discuss, Neji-san. And if, perhaps, we could just talk. As there? I came only partially out of free will, as you likely know, he said, gritting his teeth and glancing around, avoiding her. I find little use for idle conversation such as this. Hinata gazed at him, feeling strangely brave these days, which surprised her, but she wasn't going to question it. She gathered herself, looked him in the face, and spoke boldly. But that still means there was free will involved. Very little, was his quick and succinct response. Her shoulders fell, and she wilted. There was little point in trying to convince someone with such ready defenses. But she wasn't finished yet. Byakugan, do you know what this can do? She asked, looking around her while her bloodline limit was activated. It's a very powerful ability to have. But I think that, maybe, both of us are looking through each other, and not actually seeing anything, she said, waiting despite knowing the answer to the question, and continuing when he nodded in agreement. Perhaps the issue is that you have too good of vision. She held her breath, and that was it. She had run out of elegant words and phrases, and it was up to him now. Hinata bowed her head and deactivated her bloodline limit after a period of silence, but his voice stopped her as she turned to go. Juken. She turned back to him in surprise as his voice startled her. Juken. A form of taijutsu that harms the circulatory system of the chakras. Utilizing a bloodline limit that can see the inner chakra coils is necessary. Hinata closed her eyes and grinned a little, but for the moment, this was sufficient. There was so much she needed to tell him, so much they could discuss, so much they could share. Arigato, Neji-san. It had taken more than she had anticipated, and now she was wondering who else was aware that she and Naruto were departing. She waited until he was almost completely out of sight before pressing a hand to her heart and almost collapsing on herself. Haruno Sakura gave a long, incredulous cry in another area of Konoha. Naruto. Are you departing from Konoha? What about Sasuke-kun? She scowled. What about Hinata-san? With a wrinkled nose, Naruto said, Hinata-chan is also departing. Like me, she's heading off to train. Demo. I'm not going anywhere just yet. You might as well just go if you're going to leave, she said, giving him a sour look. Don't stay any longer than absolutely necessary. Naruto smiled slightly. He and Sakura had a peculiar relationship. As they grew older, he had a crush on her just because she was attractive and had a good smile, but as they advanced in the academy and Sakura fell in love with Sasuke, he had politely retreated into an almost friendship. However, what is Hinata-san like, Naruto? I never really knew her at the academy, but she seems like a nice enough girl, Sakura said, sweeping her long pink hair over her shoulders and giving him a questioning look. However, isn't there something unique about her? The entire team had been called into the office after that mission, and after a period of mourning had passed, Tsunade, still getting used to her new role as Hokage, had given them a long, overdrawn, and very obviously scripted lecture about secrecy and village policy, ending with a pointed glare and a threatening fist before the Sandame had intervened. Naruto grimaced. Sakura had been the highest-scoring girl of their graduating class for a reason, at least on the written test. Avoid talking about it, thinking about it, or having dreams about it. Nobody should ever know what transpired on that mission, and you will be held accountable if it does. Naruto sheepishly rubbed his head and said, Sakura-chan, Hinata's a nice girl. She's also not a bad fighter. But nothing, nothing special, except for her eyes, which are really awesome. Yes, indeed, they do this strange thing that allows her to see your activities from anywhere in. Sakura stared at him in shock. She thought she knew Naruto, the dumb, the clueless, the one who didn't give a damn what people thought of him, the one who was suddenly leaving, the one who, when he spoke of Hinata, had a tone in his voice and a look in his eyes she had never seen before. He felt uneasy, and a little bashful. Sakura grinned and pushed her pink hair over her shoulders. Naruto was maturing and leaving. However, he would always be Uzumaki Naruto, the man who referred to himself as the most unpredictable person in the village. And now he was running down the street, waving and shouting goodbye, and he was smiling so loudly that it was annoying, saying that Ichiraku would close soon if he didn't hurry. Sakura waved back and grinned until he left. Hello.na. Ta. Hinata winced and pulled the blanket tighter around herself as a loud knock echoed through the tiny apartment. Hello.na. Ta. The door moaned agonizingly before bending and a dense cloud of dust rose up from where it fell as the voice roared once more and the series of demanding knocks changed to heavy, insistent thumps. Hello. Na. Ta. When a face leaned in near hers, Hinata braced herself to throw back the blanket and confront her intruder. She yelled and stumbled back, instinctively reaching for the blankets once more. The expression mocked her, saying, Hi.na, Ta, I found you. H. Hazuki.san, P. Please, N. Not yet. The older woman shook her head and frowned, saying, I'm sorry, Hinata. She pointed up one finger and said, the first thing you have to learn about being my student is that it's always give and take. I've already stayed here for a lot longer than I ever wanted to. I gave much more than I wanted to because I can appreciate your perspective. It's time for me to go now. With a V for victory sign, she threw one arm into the air and said, Hinata, pack your bags, we're heading out. Well, is this it? Yeah, you're really going. Hinata, back safely. The cries of her dear friends reached her even though they were far away, and Hinata grinned as she slowly reached one hand toward the Hokage monument, which framed the Yondaime's majestic face. I promise, I'll be everything you wanted your village to be, she said, her voice hardly audible even to herself. After whispering a final goodbye to her teammate and taking one last glance at her house, Hinata hefted her pack and got ready to leave, sighing to herself that Sasuke had not apparently come to see her off. Hinata. Naruto ran up to her, panting, bending slightly and inhaling deeply. I refuse to bid you farewell. When he said those words, Hinata flinched in shock, then her face lit up with a smile, and she leaned forward to lift him up. I could never say goodbye to you. So, move quickly. Even though he made an effort to remain composed, she couldn't help but laugh because he was clearly flushed. All right, let's try our best. Hinata gave him a smile that she hadn't had in a long time. Hinata. Act quickly. Hazuki grinned ruefully as she observed them from a distance. She looked up, blinking back the sudden tears, and saw a familiar face watching her from atop Konoha's walls. She muttered, Sasuke.kun, and he cocked his head forward, pointing to the road ahead. She realized he was urging her on, and her smile grew. Hinata inhaled deeply, gave Naruto a firm nod, and then turned to leave after giving her other teammate one final glance. Naruto took a deep breath as she moved further and further away from him. Hina-chan, I'll see you soon. With a smile on her face, Hinata continued to walk in the direction of their future. Hi, Naruto.kun. Now it was his turn. Naruto observed the crowd assembling around him, all of them lost in a sea of words and feelings. You dolt, hurry up and return. When you return, show me what you've learned so far. Write to us. Additionally, remember us. Everyone should say hello to Hinata if they see her. Hinata. He now had the opportunity to follow her. You got it. He gave them his well-known smile before sprinting after Jiraiya, who was already standing outside the gates. Standing at the very edge, half hidden in the shadow of the gates, Sasuke raised an eyebrow and looked up apathetically. For a brief moment, Naruto wanted to make a scene and hold on to his teammate sobbing, if only to irritate him, but he refrained from doing so. Don't get yourself killed, he said, and Naruto knew it was the closest he would get to saying goodbye. Rather, Naruto continued to walk until he was just past him. Wait for us, Sasuke. The blonde turned back and put his hands over his mouth, and he ran on until he had caught up to Jiraiya. And avoid making any foolish decisions. Naruto smiled and followed Jiraiya out of the village as Sasuke twitched but nodded. The Hokage monument, which loomed over the village, was still visible to him as they continued to leave Konoha. His father and his objective were both there. One day, I'll be up there with the greatest leaders of all time. Await my arrival. It was time to grow up and stop being a child. It was time to put the past behind us. It was time for him to start moving with time, even though it had always been moving. Let's try our hardest, together. They had to give it their all for the time being. And they could be at their peak when they returned, together.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.